Project Artichoke was one of the CIA's earliest and most disturbing ventures into the human mind, an experimental program that sought to control a person's behavior by manipulating their memory, identity, and will. Before MK-Ultra became a household name for government psychological manipulation, Artichoke was already diving into the shadows, exploring hypnosis, forced amnesia, narco-interrogation, and even involuntary assassination. Project Artichoke. At the heart of Artichoke was a chilling question. Can a person be controlled to perform acts against their own moral code without remembering it? The CIA didn't just ask this question, they acted on it. Subjects, often unknowing, were drugged with substances like LSD, scopolamine, and sodium pentothal. They were hypnotized, isolated, psychologically broken. Then, memories were selectively erased, sometimes using multiple levels of hypnosis, other times with drugs that wipe clean the last hours or days of a person's consciousness. In some cases, subjects were allegedly trained to carry out specific acts, including self-destructive ones, on cue, with no memory of who ordered them or why they had done it. The program wasn't science fiction. Declassified documents reveal real trials where operatives tested whether they could induce someone to cross borders, spy, or kill, and forget it all afterwards. It wasn't just a mind control experiment. It was a search for the perfect human puppet. The terror of Artichoke isn't just what they did. It's what they almost perfected. A human being who could be programmed like a machine, used as a weapon, and discarded without evidence. The psychological damage left behind wasn't measured. The victims, many never even knew they were part of something monstrous. Project Bluebird. Project Bluebird was the CIA's first serious descent into the terrifying possibility of absolute psychological control. Launched in 1950, it was the blueprint for everything that followed: Artichoke, MK-Ultra, and the darkest corners of human experimentation. It was born from Cold War paranoia, where fear of enemy mind control led the U.S. to try mastering it first, no matter the human cost. The goal of Bluebird was as haunting as it was ambitious: to create a mind that could be shattered, rebuilt, and controlled entirely by external command. They weren't just studying the mind, they were trying to own it. Bluebird investigated hypnosis, narco-hypnosis, and memory erasure. Operatives tested whether a subject's identity could be split, like carving a person into separate selves, each unaware of the other. Could someone be made to betray their closest allies? Could they lie or even kill without remembering? Could a person be broken and rebuilt into a programmable asset? Prisoners, psychiatric patients, and sometimes even military personnel were used without informed consent. They were injected with truth serums, sedatives, amphetamines. They were hypnotized and interrogated until they fractured. Some were put through emotional and physical trauma to study how fear, guilt, and stress could open the door to complete mental surrender. What makes Bluebird especially disturbing is not just the science, but the intention. It wasn't about healing minds. It was about cracking them open, hollowing them out, and using what was left. The idea that a human soul could be hijacked, their memories burned, and their will overwritten wasn't a dystopian fantasy. It was a government-funded goal, and for some, a successful one. Project Often. Now, Project Often is one of the most chilling and bizarre psychological operations ever undertaken by the U.S. government. So dark and surreal that it reads like fiction, but it wasn't. Initiated in the late 1960s by the CIA and the Department of Defense, Project Often went far beyond traditional psychological research. It dug deep into the occult, psychic warfare, black magic, and the use of demonic symbolism as a psychological weapon. The project began under the guise of studying toxicology and behavioral reactions to drugs, but it quickly spiraled into something far stranger. Psychics, astrologers, witchcraft practitioners, even Satanists, were reportedly recruited and consulted. They weren't just analyzing the mind, they were trying to break its boundaries and weaponize the unseen. One core objective was to explore whether supernatural belief systems could be used to manipulate individuals or entire populations. Could the invocation of ancient archetypes, demons, angels, fear of possession, fracture someone's grip on reality? Could hallucinations triggered by drugs be molded by occult rituals to create a programmable belief system? Could fear of the supernatural be used as a psychological control tool? They tested this on unwitting participants, introducing them to extreme experiences, terrifying visions, drug-induced states, voices from the void. Some were pushed to psychological collapse. Others were studied to see how spiritual terror could override rational thought. To the CIA, religion, myth, and horror weren't off limits. They were weapons. Project Often wasn't just about drugs or science. It was about bending belief, distorting perception, and discovering whether fear of the unknown could be turned into a leash around the human mind. The scariest part? They may have found out it could. Operation Dormouse. Operation Dormouse is one of the most unsettling whispers in the world of psychological warfare, an alleged NATO-backed program that aimed to manipulate public consciousness through carefully staged acts of fear. While officially unacknowledged, testimonies and leaks suggest that Dormouse wasn't just about studying fear, it was about creating it. The operation allegedly revolved around a terrifying premise: simulate acts of state terror, bombings, kidnappings, violent uprisings, not to destroy an enemy, but to control the emotions of the public. These events would appear spontaneous, perpetrated by radicals or extremists, but behind the chaos was cold, calculated, psychological engineering. The goal? Push society into a state of fear so intense that people would willingly surrender freedom for security. The human mind is never more malleable than when it's afraid, and Operation Dormouse sought to exploit this vulnerability on a national scale by feeding the subconscious with images of chaos, blood, and betrayal. They could shape public opinion, justify new laws, and manufacture consent for militarized control. It wasn't just about changing what people thought, it was about reshaping what they felt. Terror became a language, fear became a tool, and public trauma was treated not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to program obedience. Those involved in uncovering traces of the operation described manipulated news cycles, staged leftist attacks, and planted evidence. People began to believe the world was unraveling, while the real unraveling was happening inside their minds. If true, Operation Dormouse reveals a terrifying truth. Sometimes the fear you feel isn't accidental, it's designed. Project Stargate. Project Stargate was the U.S. military's classified dive into the paranormal, an official program where soldiers and scientists attempted to use psychic abilities to spy across time, space, and continents. It wasn't fantasy. It wasn't rumor. It was real. Funded and run for over 2 decades, Stargate explored remote viewing, the claimed ability to mentally see distant locations, hidden objects, and even enemy secrets, all without ever leaving a room. The stakes were high. The Cold War was a game of shadows, and when intelligence agencies heard whispers of Soviet psychic research, the U.S. responded with its own. Through Stargate, they recruited ordinary people, sometimes soldiers, sometimes civilians, and trained them to push their consciousness outside of physical limits. These individuals were tested in tightly controlled sessions where they would close their eyes and describe classified military installations, buried hostages, or the insides of foreign government bunkers. And sometimes it worked. Official declassified reports buried in obscure government archives show detailed hits, cases where remote viewers accurately described locations and objects they couldn't possibly know about. the CIA and DIA weren't just mildly curious. They kept funding it for over 20 years. The program blended science with mysticism, using meditation, altered states, and deep psychological conditioning. The remote viewers spoke of floating through space, seeing colors they couldn't describe, hearing voices not their own. Some were haunted by what they saw: death camps, hidden labs, nuclear secrets. Stargate wasn't just about psychic spying. It was a doorway to something deeper, a place where consciousness, war, and the unexplained collided. And the most unnerving part, even the government admitted they got results. Zeretsung. Zeretsung was the East German Stasi's most insidious weapon, an invisible method of psychological destruction designed not to kill the body, but to unmake the mind. Unlike brutal interrogations or public crackdowns, Zeretsung operated in the shadows. It was a slow, deliberate erosion of a person's sense of self, identity, and reality, executed with surgical precision and chilling intent. The word Zeretsung translates to decomposition. That's exactly what it aimed to do: decompose a human being from the inside out. Targets, often political dissidents, artists, or critics of the regime, were subjected to campaigns so subtle and relentless that they often had no idea they were under attack. Their phone lines were tapped, mail intercepted and altered, friends and employers manipulated, jobs would be lost, relationships quietly poisoned, reputations dismantled through anonymous rumors and false accusations. Imagine waking up to find your keys moved, your partner suddenly mistrusts you, your work disappears, you begin to doubt your memory, your relationships, your own sanity. That was Zeretsung's genius and its horror. It didn't need prison cells or firing squads. It turned the world around the victim into a psychological maze they couldn't escape, where every familiar thing became a threat. The Stasi even infiltrated therapy sessions, ensuring that those who sought help were further broken. Over time, the target would spiral into paranoia, isolation, depression, often without knowing why. Some committed suicide, others lived in silence, never discovering that the suffering they endured wasn't chance, it was engineered. Zeretsung wasn't about silencing dissent. It was about making you doubt you ever had a voice to begin with. McFten subprogram. The McFten subprogram is one of the most bizarre and terrifying shadows cast by the CIA's vast MKUltra empire, a dark thread woven into a tapestry of drugs, deception, and something far stranger, the occult. Where most MKUltra subprojects focused on chemicals and behavioral control, McFten slipped into forbidden territory. It didn't just ask how to control the mind, it asked whether otherworldly forces could help do it. Launched in the late 1960s, McFten allegedly partnered intelligence agents with psychics, witches, astrologers, and self-proclaimed sorcerers. The goal was to test the edges of human influence and psychological submission, not just through pharmacology, but through rituals, psychic phenomena, and spiritual terror. Civilian test subjects were reportedly drugged, hypnotized, and subjected to psychological experiments designed or influenced by these occult consultants. The drugs used weren't just meant to sedate or stimulate, they were chosen to open the mind, to break the ego, shatter internal defenses, and allow what the CIA called non-conventional entities to flood the psyche. These substances blurred the lines between hallucination and ritual, between psychological breakdown and spiritual possession. Subjects reported visions of grotesque beings, out-of-body experiences, and feelings of being controlled by something not human. It wasn't science, it was psychological alchemy, and it pushed the human mind beyond its limits. Some of those involved left permanently damaged, others disappeared from records entirely. The chilling truth about McFten isn't just the unethical experimentation, it's the possibility that the CIA wasn't just testing what people believed, they were testing what belief itself could do to a mind on the edge. Tavistock Institute experiments. The Tavistock Institute may appear to be just another academic research center, but behind its doors lay some of the most far-reaching psychological experiments ever conducted, experiments that many believe laid the foundation for mass mind control through media, education, and culture. Born out of World War I battlefield trauma research, Tavistock evolved into a hub for social engineering, quietly influencing everything from political behavior to pop culture. Funded by military and intelligence agencies, Tavistock focused not on individual minds, but on entire societies. Their goal was to study how beliefs, values, and emotional responses could be guided without the public ever realizing. They asked questions like, how do you break collective morale? How do you program obedience? How do you reshape the identity of a population? Their research into trauma, particularly shock theory, found that when people are emotionally overwhelmed by crisis or contradiction, they become vulnerable to suggestion. This insight was weaponized. Media could be used not just to inform, but to disorient. Music and entertainment could shift values over time. Contradictory messaging could destabilize logic and replace it with emotional compliance. Experiments involve war veterans, civilians, and even children. Behavior modification, crowd psychology, authority conditioning, nothing was off limits. Their influence reached into advertising, propaganda, education reform, and psychological warfare strategies used by NATO and beyond. The real power of Tavistock wasn't in what it did openly, it was in how its theories quietly shaped the tools used to guide what we watch, how we think, and what we believe. The most disturbing part? You may not even notice it working. That's the point. Acoustic Psycho-Correction. Acoustic Psycho-Correction is a mind control method developed by Russian scientists that bypasses logic, resistance, and even awareness, reaching straight into the subconscious with inaudible commands. It's not hypnosis, not propaganda, not brainwashing as we know it. It's something far more subtle and far more terrifying. This technique involves embedding subliminal, psychologically charged phrases into acoustic signals, messages that ride on inaudible frequencies, directly targeting the unconscious mind. These signals don't need your permission. You don't hear them, you just feel them. And slowly, sometimes imperceptibly, your thoughts begin to shift. Your decisions change. Your beliefs bend. The technology was reportedly tested on prisoners, psychiatric patients, and even political dissidents. Russian scientists claimed they could reduce aggression, alter opinions, and even plant new motivations into a person's psyche without them knowing why they felt so different. Through hidden speakers, modified headsets, or even telephone lines, subjects were exposed to layers of sound that whispered instructions beneath awareness, repeated until those whispers became internal voices. Western intelligence agencies took notice. In declassified U.S. documents, officials described the potential of acoustic psycho-correction as potentially devastating, not because it was loud, but because it was silent, a weapon that left no physical scars, no clear evidence, only changed minds. The most haunting aspect is its subtlety. Imagine believing your actions are your own, your fears, your doubts, your anger, never realizing they were planted there by a voice you never heard. This is the essence of acoustic psycho-correction. Control without confrontation, influence without awareness, a war fought not over land, but inside your head. Monarch Programming. Monarch Programming is the most haunting and controversial alleged offspring of MKUltra, a system of psychological control so brutal, so methodically cruel that it doesn't just rewire the mind, it splits it. Rooted in the theory of trauma-based mind control, Monarch is said to use severe physical, emotional, and sexual abuse to shatter a victim's psyche into fragments, each fragment then molded into a controllable alter. The name Monarch is no accident. Just as a monarch butterfly undergoes a complete metamorphosis, the human subject is broken down and rebuilt into something else. The process allegedly begins in early childhood, where repeated trauma forces the brain to dissociate to survive. Each dissociative state becomes a compartment, an alter personality, trained for obedience, seduction, violence, or espionage. Victims are said to be programmed with cues, words, symbols, gestures that can activate these alters at will. Some are created to have no memory of their other selves, functioning like human robots, unaware of the commands buried in their subconscious. Handlers reportedly use hypnotic scripts, electroshock, and ritualistic abuse to reinforce the programming. Monarch has been linked, without official proof, to secret projects involving spies, celebrities, child trafficking rings, and blackmail operations. Whistleblowers speak of government-sanctioned, cult-like networks, where victims are born into generational control systems. Their eyes scream truth, even when their lips remain silent. What makes Monarch so terrifying isn't just the trauma or secrecy, it's the possibility that people walk among us, smiling, speaking, succeeding, without knowing they're not fully in control, that their mind is a fractured mirror reflecting what someone else designed them to be. Project Chickwi was a quiet but deeply unsettling U.S. intelligence operation with a singular goal: to intercept and catalog every new psychoactive drug being developed in Europe before it could be released, studied, or fall into the wrong hands. But in truth, the wrong hands weren't terrorists or foreign enemies. The CIA wanted these drugs for themselves, to test them, weaponize them, and see how they could be used to control, fracture, or reshape the human mind. Launched during the Cold War as a sister project to MK-Ultra, Chickwi didn't conduct experiments directly. Instead, it monitored chemical patents, medical journals, and research institutions across Europe, especially in Germany, Switzerland, and the UK. Whenever a new compound with psychoactive potential was discovered, CIA agents and front organizations raced to obtain samples, sometimes legally, often not. But this wasn't just about getting high. The CIA wasn't interested in recreational drugs. They were hunting for substances that altered perception, dissolved identity, and created vulnerability to suggestion. They wanted drugs that could make someone forget who they were, or believe a false memory, or trust a stranger with complete obedience. Many of these compounds were tested on prisoners, mental patients, and even unsuspecting civilians. Some caused intense euphoria followed by crippling depression. Others created suggestibility so powerful that interrogators could implant entire belief systems. These drugs never reached the public. They were too dangerous or too effective. Chickwi was a chemical treasure hunt, but what they were really searching for was control over memory, fear, love, guilt, obedience. And every vial, every pill, every unnamed molecule brought them one step closer to owning the human soul. Project MK-Naomi. Project MK-Naomi was the CIA's darkest biological experiment, a covert program where the human body became both battlefield and weapon. Hidden behind the veil of national security, MK-Naomi wasn't about defense. It was about domination, of biology, of behavior, of life itself. Born from the twisted legacy of MK-Ultra, MK-Naomi was run in partnership with the U.S. Army's Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick. While MK-Ultra explored the mind with chemicals and hypnosis, MK-Naomi took a more insidious path, designing bioagents capable of incapacitating, manipulating, or silently killing. They engineered bacteria, viruses, and toxins, some deadly, others tailored to break a person without leaving a trace. But MK-Naomi wasn't just about killing. It was about control, Rumors and redacted files suggest the program explored behavioral modification through bioweapons, using tailored diseases or chemical compounds to alter mood, cognitive function, even decision-making. Imagine a spray that could induce fear, a pill that created obedience, a virus that caused confusion in enemy ranks. It wasn't science fiction, it was on the table. Test subjects were often unaware. Some were civilians, some were military personnel. They were infected, injected, exposed. Some were told they were getting vaccines. Others were never told anything at all. The cruelty was silent, and the effects were often irreversible. What makes MK-Naomi truly horrifying is its potential reach. Bioweapons that didn't just destroy armies, but minds, identities, and free will. Not through bombs or bullets, but through a cough, a handshake, a touch. It was invisible warfare, and the battlefield was the human soul. Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax is perhaps the most twisted chapter in the CIA's long pursuit of psychological domination, a surreal and brutal experiment where pleasure, trust, and vulnerability were turned into weapons. Beginning in the 1950s, under the MK-Ultra program, the CIA set up a series of covert safe houses in San Francisco and New York. Inside, nothing was safe. These rooms were wired with hidden microphones, two-way mirrors, and cameras. But the real trap came wrapped in silk and perfume. The agency hired prostitutes to lure unsuspecting men, often drifters, low-level criminals, or lonely citizens, into these apartments. Once inside, the targets were drugged with LSD or other psychoactive substances without their knowledge or consent. As they spiraled into confusion and hallucination, agents behind the mirror watched, recorded, and took notes. These were not scientific studies. These were voyeuristic psychological ambushes. The CIA wasn't just interested in the effects of the drugs. They wanted to know how to manipulate a person at their most disarmed. How much truth would someone spill when intoxicated, seduce, and destabilize? Could you control someone through a mixture of sex, fear, and chemicals? Could a moment of ecstasy become a gateway to obedience? Some subjects never knew what had happened. Others were mentally scarred, haunted by vivid nightmares they couldn't explain. The women, many coerced into cooperation, became part of a system that weaponized intimacy itself. Operation Midnight Climax revealed something horrifying. The U.S. government was willing to strip away dignity, sanity, and human connection in the name of control, not in the shadows of enemy territory, but in bedrooms, one dose at a time. Subproject 119 MK-Ultra. Subproject 119 was the MK-Ultra program's leap into the future, a classified attempt to bridge the gap between man and machine, to turn the brain into something readable, trackable, and ultimately controllable. While much of MK-Ultra focused on breaking the mind through trauma and drugs, Subproject 119 aimed to map it, monitor it, and wire it directly into technology. Launched in the 1960s, this subproject pulled together research on EEG, electroencephalography, radiotelemetry, bioelectric signals, and electromagnetic brain stimulation. The goal was chillingly clear: develop tools to monitor and manipulate brain activity remotely, possibly in real time. Intelligence agencies weren't just interested in understanding thought. They wanted to intercept it, predict it, even rewrite it. They studied how to transmit brain waves to machines, decode neural signals into data, and use external signals, electrical fields, radio waves, to influence mental states from a distance. This meant reading the brain without touching it, and changing what it felt without warning. Subproject 119 hinted at technologies that could one day be used to induce fear, confusion, compliance, or erase emotion entirely. Telemetry units could collect data from a subject wirelessly, even track shifts in mood, memory, or aggression. brainwave patterns could be harvested like digital fingerprints, and in some experiments, signals were reportedly sent back in visible waves, altering perception, interrupting thought. The human mind was being reshaped not by violence or ideology, but by frequency. The horror of Subproject 119 isn't just its ambition, it's the question it leaves behind. If someone could speak directly to your mind, would you even know it wasn't your voice anymore? Operation Spellbinde. Operation Spellbinde is one of the most whispered about, deeply unsettling rumors within the world of covert psychological warfare, a CIA operation that, if true, turned the very concept of fame into a psychological weapon. Unlike other programs focused on drugs, torture, or military enemies, Spellbinde allegedly aimed its sights at something even more powerful: celebrity influence. The premise was both brilliant and terrifying. What if you could control the minds that control the culture? What if you could use beloved actors, musicians, or public figures, not just as entertainers, but as tools for mass persuasion, emotional conditioning, and ideological programming? According to rumors leaked by former insiders and buried in fringe testimonies, Spellbinde explored ways to manipulate or create public icons who would subtly guide public thought, emotion, and behavior under the illusion of free expression. The CIA allegedly studied celebrities with psychological vulnerabilities, those struggling with identity, addiction, trauma. They were perfect subjects, worshipped by millions, yet personally unstable. Through handlers, therapists, romantic partners, and sometimes even psychiatrists planted by the agency, these stars were guided into controlled mental states using a blend of hypnosis, pharmaceuticals, trauma reinforcement, and emotional isolation. Over time, their personalities could be fractured, their beliefs rewritten, their influence weaponized. Their music, interviews, meltdowns, and comebacks weren't just personal. They were programmed narratives designed to shape how the public thought about love, rebellion, trust, authority, even spirituality. A breakdown on stage, a radical political statement, a sudden transformation, each potentially choreographed for effect. What makes Spellbinde so chilling isn't just the manipulation of individuals, but the idea that the icons we idolize may not be mirrors of our culture, but architects of it, and the hands pulling the strings remain invisible. EM mind control experiments. Woodpecker Grid. The EM mind control experiments, often linked to the infamous Woodpecker Grid, are among the most unnerving and mysterious allegations to emerge from the Cold War. Claims that the Soviet Union broadcast electromagnetic frequencies across the globe to subtly disrupt minds, emotions, and entire populations. These weren't nuclear threats or conventional weapons. They were invisible pulses, soft, relentless, and deeply penetrating. Beginning in the late 1970s, a strange rhythmic tapping sound began interfering with global radio and communication systems. Nicknamed the Russian woodpecker, this pulse originated from massive radar transmitters in the USSR. But what disturbed Western intelligence wasn't just the noise, it was the frequency range. The pulses fell within bands known to affect human brainwaves, delta, theta, and alpha ranges, linked to sleep, emotion, and consciousness. Some U.S. analysts and researchers believed this was no accident. They suspected the Soviets were experimenting with EM mind control, beaming low-frequency signals into populations to disrupt thought patterns, cause anxiety, depression, fatigue, even aggression. In theory, entire cities could be pushed into unrest or lethargy without a single bullet fired. Reports emerged of altered moods, insomnia outbreaks, and behavioral shifts in areas exposed to the signal. Intelligence insiders feared the Soviets were trying to master the art of emotional destabilization from a distance, testing a weapon that could warp perception and undermine mental resilience. The terrifying core of the woodpecker theory wasn't just in its scope, it was its plausibility. If thoughts could be bent by frequencies, if fear or rage could be dialed up like a radio station, then the battlefield of the future was no longer land, sea, or sky. It was you. DARPA's Silent Talk. DARPA's Silent Talk project is not science fiction. It's a classified window into a future where the battlefield no longer needs voices, radios, or commands. Instead, communication flows silently, brain to brain, no words, no gestures, no delay, just pure thought, transmitted like a signal. And behind this eerie new frontier is one single objective: eliminate the space between intention and action. Launched by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Silent Talk set out to decode the electrical signals the brain generates before a person actually speaks. These pre-speech neural patterns, what you think just before you say it, were mapped using EEG headsets and advanced machine learning algorithms. The goal? Translate brain activity into real-time signals, then beam that data directly into another person's mind. Imagine a soldier under fire, issuing complex orders without ever opening his mouth. Imagine a drone operator guiding machines by thought alone. Now imagine that same technology being refined not just to transmit commands, but emotions, images, memories. Silent Talk's implications go far beyond war. This isn't just communication, it's access to your intentions, to your truth, to your vulnerabilities. If a signal can read your thoughts before you voice them, it can also intercept them, override them, change them. DARPA's vision is efficiency, but the shadow behind it is control, because once your thoughts are no longer private, once speech itself becomes obsolete, what's left of your freedom? Silent Talk isn't just a military upgrade, it's the slow erasure of silence as sanctuary, and the birth of a world where your mind is no longer yours alone. Project Pandora. Project Pandora was the U.S. government's silent descent into a new form of warfare, one that targeted not the body, but the brain. Launched in the 1960s under deep secrecy, it was born from a terrifying revelation. American diplomats stationed in Moscow were being bombarded with low-level microwave radiation. The source? Unconfirmed. The effects? Confusing, but undeniable. Insomnia, headaches, mood swings, memory loss, and emotional instability. Rather than warn the victims, the U.S. decided to replicate the phenomenon. Project Pandora set out to study how microwave frequencies affect human behavior, cognition, and physiology. Researchers exposed monkeys, dogs, and eventually humans to focused beams of microwave energy. They observed erratic heart rates, neurological disruption, and behavioral changes. The deeper they dug, the darker the implications became. These weren't just health side effects. These were signs of control, the ability to influence emotion, mental clarity, and even aggression without any physical contact. What made Pandora so disturbing wasn't just its findings, it was its potential. Scientists discovered that certain microwave frequencies could interfere with the brain's own electrical activity. Thought itself could be scrambled, emotional regulation could be hacked. Some frequencies induce calm, others cause panic. The mind became a tuning fork, and they were learning how to play it. There are reports that some subjects experience forced thoughts, confusion, or sudden emotional spikes. The line between internal and external began to blur. Were you thinking it, or was it being broadcast into you? Project Pandora was shut down, or so we're told, but its legacy lingers in classified files and quiet corners of modern defense research. The question it asked has never gone away. If your thoughts can be penetrated without your knowledge, what part of you is truly your own? USSR's psychotronic weaponry programs. The Soviet Union's psychotronic weaponry programs represent one of the most disturbing and enigmatic frontiers in psychological warfare, a dark confluence of neuroscience, belief manipulation, and electromagnetic force. Behind the Iron Curtain, while the West obsessed over nuclear arms, the Soviets pursued a quieter apocalypse, the ability to control human thoughts and behavior using invisible frequencies. At the heart of this research was a terrifying question. Could the human mind be remotely influenced without touch, sound, or warning, using nothing but energy? The USSR believed it could. Beginning in the 1960s, Soviet scientists poured funding into what they called psychotronic weapons, devices designed to emit specific electromagnetic, infrasonic, or microwave frequencies that could influence biological systems. These weren't crude experiments. They were methodical trials on soldiers, civilians, and prisoners. Subjects exposed to certain frequencies reported everything from nausea and fatigue to sudden aggression, deep fear, hallucinations, and total mental confusion. But it didn't stop at causing discomfort. Soviet theorists claimed that by finely tuning electromagnetic pulses, they could disrupt brain waves, influence emotions, and even implant thoughts. Entire behavioral states, sleep, rage, submission, could be triggered from a distance without the target ever knowing they'd been compromised. Western intelligence agencies were horrified by the implications. Declassified U.S. documents describe panic over reports of Soviet psychotronic labs, mobile mind control units, and long-range behavioral weapons capable of breaking a population's will. No sound, no pain, just a shift in your thoughts, a voice in your head, a fear you can't explain. The scariest part of the USSR's psychotronic programs isn't that they existed, it's how close they may have come to proving that the battlefield of the future isn't land, sea, or sky. It's your mind. Project Mannequin. Project Mannequin is one of the most disturbing and controversial alleged black projects to ever surface from the UK's shadow government operations, a chilling mix of mind control, military experimentation, and genetic manipulation whispered about in conspiracy circles, leaked by whistleblowers, and dismissed by authorities. Yet the details are too grotesquely specific to ignore. According to testimony from insiders like James Casbolt, a former alleged MI6 asset, Project Mannequin was based out of underground facilities in the UK, places like the highly secretive Peasmore base in Berkshire. Its goal? To create the perfect human weapon, emotionally detached, neurologically programmed, genetically enhanced, a literal mannequin, empty of identity, full of instruction. Children were reportedly taken from orphanages or military families and subjected to trauma-based mind control, beatings, electroshock, isolation, and staged abuse, used to fracture the personality into multiple compartments. Each fragment would then be programmed with a specific function: surveillance, seduction, assassination, obedience. These alters could be triggered with coded words, gestures, or even audio frequencies, making the person carry out actions with no conscious memory afterward. But the horror didn't stop there. The program allegedly involved advanced cloning and genetic engineering, designing programmable life forms with enhanced strength, pain tolerance, and zero empathy. These beings, whether born or built, were trained for one purpose: control through complete internal erasure. Reports suggest these assets were used in espionage, sex trafficking networks, and psychological black ops. The truth remains hidden, denied, buried beneath layers of official silence. But if even a fraction of Mannequin is real, it forces a horrifying question. What happens when you turn a human into a machine and teach it to forget it was ever alive? Operation Sunstreak. Operation Sunstreak was the classified continuation of America's venture into psychic espionage, an eerie, mind-bending program operated by the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, that sought to weaponize human consciousness itself. After Project Stargate revealed the potential of remote viewing, the ability to perceive hidden or distant information using only the mind. Sunstreak took the torch, deepening the research, sharpening the skill, and training psychic soldiers in absolute secrecy. Inside heavily guarded rooms, far from public scrutiny, government-sanctioned viewers would sit in silence, blindfolded, sometimes with only a series of random numbers as a cue. Then, using altered states of consciousness, meditation, and highly specific protocols, they would describe nuclear facilities in North Korea, terrorist locations, or the contents of sealed containers across the world, and shockingly often, they were right. Sunstreak wasn't a fringe experiment. It was a funded, multi-year military operation. Viewers were trained like elite operatives, taught how to control visions, suppress interference, and track thoughts across continents. Some described sensations of floating, of leaving their bodies, of seeing through the eyes of others. Others began to unravel, unable to cope with the relentless invasion of other people's pain, trauma, and secrets. The deeper they went, the weirder it got. Reports included contact with non-human intelligences, glimpses of future events, and unexplained emotional transference between viewer and target. The lines between intelligence gathering and spiritual warfare began to blur. But what haunted the participants most wasn't just what they saw. It was the growing realization that consciousness itself might be a weapon, and once you aim it, it sometimes aims back. NSA's Syntactic Behavior Manipulation. NSA's syntactic behavior manipulation is an alleged psychological warfare technique that doesn't rely on violence, chemicals, or electromagnetic waves, but on words. Not just what is said, but how it's said. Sentence structures, rhythms, hidden linguistic patterns. It's a form of thought control so subtle that it bypasses your defenses and rewires your perception without you ever realizing it happened. According to whistleblower accounts and leaked documents, the NSA studied the deep structure of language, the unconscious systems that govern how we interpret meaning. By mastering syntax and semantic framing, they allegedly discovered that certain arrangements of words can create predictable emotional and cognitive responses. It's not just mind reading, it's mind steering. Messages crafted using this technique are said to contain embedded linguistic triggers, words placed in hypnotic rhythms, emotionally charged sequences, or semantic loops that nudge the brain into specific mental states: compliance, anxiety, confusion, even euphoria. These messages could be hidden in media, text, speeches, or digital communication, woven so seamlessly into the flow of content that the conscious mind never questions it. Imagine reading a sentence that leaves you inexplicably unsettled, or watching a speech that suddenly makes you trust someone you shouldn't. You don't know why, you just feel it. That's syntactic manipulation. It hijacks your internal narrator. What makes it terrifying is its silence. It leaves no trace, no scar. It doesn't tell you what to think. It structures your thoughts for you. And if this technique is real, the most dangerous weapon in modern psychological warfare isn't a gun, a drone, or a virus. It's a sentence. The Gateway Process, CIA. The Gateway Process is a CIA documented, mind-expanding technique that reads less like military protocol and more like a spiritual initiation, except it wasn't discovered in a monastery or temple. It was engineered in a lab, studied by U.S. Army intelligence, and buried in classified archives. At its core, the Gateway Process uses sound, specifically binaural beats, to unlock altered states of consciousness so powerful they blur the line between reality and illusion, body and soul, self and universe. Developed by the Monarch Institute and analyzed in a 1983 CIA report titled Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process, this method combined neuroscience, quantum physics, and esoteric philosophy. Subjects listened to specific frequencies that synchronize the left and right hemispheres of the brain, pulling them into deep states of meditation and heightened awareness. But this wasn't relaxation, it was activation. Practitioners reported experiences of out-of-body travel, time distortion, contact with non-physical entities, and the feeling of merging with a universal consciousness. The CIA didn't dismiss it, they tried to map it. They treated the human mind like a radar dish, tuning it into hidden dimensions to gather intelligence, receive impressions, and possibly even influence distant events through focused intent. The report described the universe as a hologram and the human brain as a receiver capable of decoding that vast information field once the proper mental frequency was unlocked. The implications were cosmic. You are not a prisoner of time. Consciousness is not local. Death is not the end. The gateway process revealed something terrifyingly beautiful, that your mind, if trained and tuned correctly, could escape reality as you know it and never come back the same. Voice to Skull, V2K. Voice to Skull, or V2K, is the name given to one of the most chilling alleged technologies in the realm of psychological warfare, a system that reportedly allows operators to beam voices directly into a person's head. No speakers, no headphones, just a disembodied whisper inside your mind, bypassing the ears and embedding itself in your thoughts. It sounds like science fiction, but declassified patents and military documents hint that it may be terrifyingly real. The idea is rooted in a technology called microwave auditory effect. When pulsed microwave frequencies hit the skull, they can create the perception of sound within the brain. The military has acknowledged this phenomenon. V2K takes it further, transmitting not just tones but full speech, words, commands, warnings, conversations that no one else can hear. For alleged targets, the experience is haunting. They report hearing voices that comment on their actions, insult them, seduce them, or instruct them, sometimes 24/7. The voices are indistinguishable from internal thought, but carry a foreign presence. Victims begin to question their sanity, relationships collapse, paranoia takes root, not because they're unstable, but because their most private space has been infiltrated. Whistleblowers claim that V2K has been tested for crowd control, psychological torture, and covert influence operations. In theory, it could be used to push someone toward breakdown, obedience, or even violence, all without ever laying a finger on them. What makes V2K terrifying isn't just what it does, it's what it erodes, the sanctity of your mind. When the voice in your head no longer belongs to you, how do you know who you are anymore? Project MK-Delta. Project MK-Delta was the CIA's covert hand behind enemy lines, a silent global mechanism for delivering MK-Ultra's mind-altering substances in real-world, high-stakes environments. While MK-Ultra was the infamous umbrella for domestic mind control research, MK-Delta was its darker, more operational twin, built to export those experiments into the shadows of foreign governments, wars, and assassinations. MK-Delta wasn't about testing in labs, it was about application. Its purpose was to take what the CIA had learned from years of drug-induced hypnosis, forced amnesia, and behavioral programming, and use it in the field. This meant slipping LSD into a diplomat's drink during a negotiation, dosing foreign agents with psychotropics mid-interrogation, unleashing temporary psychosis on political enemies so their credibility would collapse on live television. Every drop, every dose, every delivery was designed to be untraceable. Agents used aerosols, injections, contaminated food, even perfume spritzers to deliver these substances without detection. The people targeted weren't always enemies. Sometimes they were assets being tested. Other times they were civilians, collateral damage in a psychological war most of the world didn't even know was happening. The goal was behavioral disruption, confuse, discredit, disable. If they forgot who they were or why they were speaking, it was a success. No courtroom, no bloodshed, just a shattered psyche, often beyond repair. MK Delta proved one thing: mind control wasn't just a theory, it was a weapon, and unlike a gun, it left no bullet, no wound, just a broken mind and a story no one believed. In the global chessboard of espionage, MK Delta made the mind the most dangerous piece of all: Operation Chaos. Operation Chaos was the CIA's quiet war against its own people, a covert domestic surveillance program that turned the tools of foreign espionage inward, targeting U.S. citizens whose only crime was dissent. Launched in 1967 during the height of the Vietnam War, Operation Chaos was created under the pretext of protecting national security, but what it truly protected was power, from criticism, disruption, and the rising tide of public resistance. The CIA was forbidden by law from spying on Americans. Chaos shattered that boundary. Under direct orders, agents infiltrated anti-war movements, civil rights groups, student organizations, and leftist political circles. They posed as activists, gathered personal information, wiretapped phones, read private mail, and built extensive psychological profiles. The program compiled files on over 300,000 Americans, names, associations, habits, fears, weaknesses, not terrorists, not enemies, just citizens with a conscience. But this wasn't just surveillance. It was psychological warfare. Disinformation was planted to divide activist groups. Friendships were sabotaged. Paranoia was cultivated deliberately to discredit movements from within. If someone began acting erratically, questioning their allies, or suddenly dropping out of a cause, it wasn't always internal conflict. Sometimes it was chaos whispering in the cracks. The goal was simple: control the narrative, destroy unity, instill fear, make resistance feel dangerous, even hopeless. Most Americans never knew they were being watched until it was too late, and those who did know couldn't prove it. That was the genius of Operation Chaos: to wage psychological war without leaving fingerprints, to make people believe they were alone, isolated, insane, when in fact they were being dismantled by design. Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird was the CIA's silent invasion of truth itself, an orchestrated campaign to infiltrate and control the American media, turning trusted journalists into unwitting operatives and public opinion into a programmable tool. What the public believed was real, what they feared, what they loved, even what they thought they believed, could all be shaped with carefully placed stories, doctored facts, and voices that echoed the agency's agenda. Beginning in the late 1940s and peaking during the Cold War, Mockingbird embedded CIA operatives in major news organizations: Time, The Washington Post, CBS, The New York Times, not as spies, but as editors, writers, and sources. They weren't reporting news, they were crafting it. Sometimes it was subtle, steering a headline, downplaying a scandal, burying a truth. Other times, it was pure fabrication, false reports of foreign threats, heroic depictions of CIA-backed coups, hit pieces against dissenters. Some journalists were paid directly, others were manipulated emotionally, convinced they were protecting democracy. And it worked. Wars were justified, regimes were toppled, movements were discredited, all without firing a bullet. But the most disturbing part? The illusion never cracked. Millions read the morning paper or watched the nightly news without realizing their opinions were being scripted. That fear they felt, that trust, that rage, engineered. Even today, the ghost of Mockingbird lingers, because when the line between journalism and propaganda is erased, reality itself becomes a story, one that can be edited, rewritten, or deleted, and the people believing it never even know who's holding the pen. Project QK-Hilltop. Project QK-Hilltop was one of the CIA's earliest and most calculated ventures into academic mind control. hidden behind the respected walls of Cornell University's New York hospital. While students and doctors believed they were advancing the field of psychiatry, a deeper, more sinister purpose churned just beneath the surface: behavioral modification on command. Launched in the early 1950s, QK-Hilltop aimed to weaponize the human psyche. The CIA funneled funds through front organizations to Cornell, where psychiatrist Dr. Harold Wolff was tasked with dissecting the brain's response to trauma, fear, suggestion, and control. His mission: uncover how to break a person's mental defenses, then reconstruct their thoughts to suit the agency's needs. The patients were often unaware they were being studied for anything beyond routine psychiatric care, but behind closed doors, they were exposed to extreme stressors, sleep deprivation, drug-induced confusion, and manipulative therapeutic techniques that bordered on psychological torture. Personal letters were used to trigger emotional breakdowns. Deep childhood fears were uncovered, then exploited. It wasn't about healing, it was about learning how to destroy identity. Wolff reported directly to CIA handlers. He asked for access to intelligence files on interrogation, torture, and brainwashing from other nations so he could mimic and refine them in a clinical setting. He believed that if he could map the mechanisms of belief, fear, and obedience, the agency could restructure a subject's mind into anything they wanted: a double agent, a perfect liar, or a ticking weapon. QK-Hilltop blurred the line between science and sadism. It didn't just study the mind, it broke it, slowly, methodically, and with the cold precision of an academic scalpel dressed as a helping hand. Human Ecology Fund. The Human Ecology Fund was a mask, a carefully constructed, seemingly benevolent organization that hid one of the CIA's most disturbing psychological agendas. Officially, it was a nonprofit supporting academic research in mental health and human behavior. In reality, it was a CIA front, funneling black budget money into experiments on mind control, memory erasure, and behavior manipulation under the cover of science and progress. From the early 1950s through the 1970s, the Human Ecology Fund provided generous grants to psychiatrists, neurologists, and universities around the world. But these weren't ordinary research projects. Behind the academic titles and clinical jargon were experiments that mirrored torture, drugging patients without consent, inducing psychotic breaks, using electroshock therapy not to heal but to destroy identity. Many recipients didn't know the CIA was behind the funding. Others did and stayed silent. The most infamous example was Dr. Ewan Cameron, whose work at the Allen Memorial Institute in Canada, funded through Human Ecology, aimed to wipe clean a person's mind and rebuild it from scratch. Patients checked in for mild anxiety or depression and left with shattered personalities, amnesia, and irreversible trauma. The fund allowed the CIA to study the mind without ever stepping into a lab. It outsourced the ethics, disguised the intent, and left victims believing they were part of trusted medical research, when in truth they were test subjects in a psychological war no one had declared. The Human Ecology Fund wasn't about healing, it was about control, and its legacy is a haunting reminder that even institutions built on compassion can be twisted into tools of silent devastation, all behind a curtain of academic respectability. Edward Bernays' propaganda campaigns. Edward Bernays didn't need a lab, a drug, or a secret room to control minds. He did it out in the open, with newspapers, radio, advertising, and a genius-level understanding of how the human mind craves meaning, identity, and belonging. Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, is often called the father of public relations, but what he truly created was modern psychological warfare on a mass scale. His weapon wasn't violence, it was perception. Bernays understood that people don't think with logic, they think with emotion, symbols, and fear. and he turned that truth into power. In the 1920s, he convinced American women to start smoking by branding cigarettes as torches of freedom, linking rebellion to consumerism. Sales exploded. He persuaded the public to support U.S. intervention in foreign countries by framing it as defending democracy while hiding economic motives. His campaigns were often backed quietly by corporations or governments who wanted public opinion moved without debate. Bernays didn't lie outright. He guided. He reframed. He tapped into subconscious archetypes, strength, safety, beauty, patriotism, and attached them to products, policies, wars. He even admitted the terrifying potential of his work, writing, "Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government," and he meant it. Bernays proved that if you control the narrative, you control the people. Fear becomes obedience. Belonging becomes consumerism. War becomes protection. The public never even knows it's being led. And that's what makes his legacy so dangerous, because the tools he pioneered are now everywhere, and you don't even realize they're being used on you. DARPA's Narrative Networks program was not designed to write stories. It was designed to control them. Launched by the U.S. military's most advanced research arm, this program dove deep into the primal structure of human belief, asking one unnerving question: can we weaponize storytelling to shape what people believe, how they feel, and what they're willing to do? Narratives are not just entertainment. They are the software of the human brain, our way of understanding identity, morality, threat, and purpose. DARPA knew this, and instead of studying how people tell stories, they studied how stories tell us. The program used cognitive neuroscience, linguistic analysis, and behavioral psychology to map how people absorb narrative cues, how emotionally charged plots override logic, and how certain story arcs can trigger loyalty, rage, fear, or submission. Then they began building models. By dissecting myths, propaganda, religious texts, and even blockbuster films, DARPA engineers learned how to reconstruct belief systems, down to the neural pathways they activated. The ultimate goal wasn't persuasion, it was implantation, crafting stories so emotionally and psychologically precise that the audience wouldn't just accept them, they'd defend them. This wasn't about telling lies. It was about crafting truths powerful enough to erase everything else. In military and intelligence operations, this research became a weapon. Narrative interventions were used to destabilize extremist ideologies, sway enemy populations, and even alter cultural beliefs over time. But the deeper threat is civilian, because if DARPA can map the code of belief, then your reality, your fears, hopes, convictions can be rewritten without your permission. You'll never know it happened. You'll just feel it's true. CIA's personality profiling of world leaders. The CIA's psychological profiling of world leaders is one of the most quietly powerful tools in the shadow arsenal of modern intelligence. It isn't about bombs, blackmail, or surveillance. It's about entering the mind of a president, a dictator, a revolutionary, and finding the cracks, then using them. This method dates back to the early Cold War, when the U.S. realized that traditional espionage wasn't enough. To truly control outcomes on the world stage, they had to understand the psyche of those who made the decisions. The CIA began assembling psychological dossiers, not just political analyses, but deep personality assessments built from speeches, habits, childhood history, medical records, facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, and even rumored traumas. They studied whether a leader was prone to rage or restraint, narcissism or shame, insecurity or overconfidence. Did they fear abandonment? Did they need admiration? Were they impulsive under pressure, paranoid, suggestible? These weren't just traits. They were handles waiting to be pulled. The goal was pure psychological leverage. If a leader feared humiliation, they could be provoked. If they craved legacy, they could be flattered into compliance. If they hid guilt or shame, it could be exposed or simulated. Some of the most effective foreign policy maneuvers were shaped not by diplomats, but by psychologists quietly scripting human vulnerabilities into global strategy. And the leaders never knew. That's what made it so devastating. They thought they were acting on conviction, power, or instinct, but their moves had already been anticipated, predicted, steered. The real chessboard wasn't geopolitics, it was personality, and the CIA was always 10 moves ahead. Army Field Manual 33-1, Psychological Operations. Army Field Manual 33-1 is not just a document, it's a blueprint for manipulating the human mind. Officially a guidebook for conducting psychological operations, PSYOP, this U.S. military manual breaks down, in chillingly clinical detail, how to shape thoughts, control behavior, and bend the will of entire populations through the precise use of information, emotion, and influence. The manual reads like a surgeon's handbook for dissecting belief. It categorizes target audiences, civilians, soldiers, insurgents, and maps out how to reach them through fear, hope, shame, or desire. It teaches how to construct messages that don't just inform but transform, changing how a person sees their enemy, their leader, or even themselves. But the real power of FM 33-1 lies in its subtlety. It doesn't advocate overt lies. It teaches psychological framing, emphasize certain facts, omit others, use repetition, symbolism, music, and cultural cues to bypass resistance and implant a deeper emotional truth. And once that truth takes root, it spreads, not as a command, but as a belief. It outlines when to use leaflets, radio broadcasts, fake news, and whisper campaigns. It teaches operatives how to exploit cultural fault lines, religious tensions, and social fears. Even love, grief, and honor become tools, stripped of meaning and weaponized for effect. The manual isn't classified. You can read it, but most never do. And while it was written for war zones, its techniques now echo through advertising, politics, and social media, because the real battlefield isn't out there, it's inside your mind, and someone, somewhere, is already reading from this script. Project MK Search. Project MK Search was the CIA's final act in its obsessive quest to dominate the human mind. Born in the ashes of MK-Ultra, but no less dark. After MK-Ultra was exposed and publicly shut down in the early 1970s, MK Search quietly emerged as its covert successor, a continuation under a new name, buried deeper in secrecy. The mission remained unchanged: discover the perfect chemical weapon for psychological control. While the public believed mind control experiments had ended, MK Search quietly resumed the testing of psychoactive drugs, LSD, BZ, a powerful hallucinogen, and exotic compounds never named in open records. The substances weren't just about making people hallucinate. They were crafted to break resistance, erase memory, induce compliance, or collapse identity altogether. Funded under the guise of biological research, MK Search aimed to find the ideal drug cocktail to create confusion, heightened suggestibility, or total psychological surrender. Interrogators wanted tools that could open a mind like a locked door without leaving bruises. Field agents needed chemicals that could be slipped into drinks, aerosols, or even cigarettes to disarm a target mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Subjects, often prisoners, hospital patients, or military personnel, were dosed without consent. Some were monitored as they spiraled into paranoia or forgot who they were. Others endured repeated exposures until their minds cracked into fragments. Records of side effects were chilling: psychotic breaks, suicides, lasting amnesia. Yet the experiments continued, buried under layers of bureaucracy and deception. MK Search proved that ending MK-Ultra meant nothing. Only the name changed. The obsession with mental control remained, and in the silence of forgotten labs, the CIA kept asking the same haunting question: how far can a mind be bent before it breaks? Operation Gladio, Psych Warfare Division. Operation Gladio was a covert NATO program that reached into the darkest corners of psychological warfare, an unholy alliance of Western intelligence agencies, secret armies, and terror designed not to fight enemies abroad, but to frighten citizens at home. Born in post-Web 2 Europe, Gladio's official mission was to create stay-behind networks, sleeper cells ready to resist a Soviet invasion. But what it became was something else entirely, a state-sponsored theater of fear. Deep within the Psych Warfare Division, Gladio operatives studied how populations respond to trauma, panic, and chaos. Then they began creating it. Throughout the 1960s to the 1980s, Europe was shaken by a wave of bombings, assassinations, and mass shootings, attacks often blamed on communists, anarchists, or radical leftists. But declassified documents and chilling testimonies later revealed a deeper truth. Some of these atrocities were orchestrated by Gladio operatives, often with CIA and MI6 support. The strategy? Create terror, then offer control. This method, known as the strategy of tension, was psychological warfare in its purest form. Shock the public with violence, break their sense of safety, then guide their fear toward political obedience, harsher laws, right-wing crackdowns, surrender of civil liberties. The enemy didn't matter, fear did. Operatives planted evidence, manipulated media narratives, and ensured that each new attack felt like another nail in the coffin of freedom until people begged for their own restraints. Operation Gladio proved something terrifying, that terror doesn't always come from your enemies. Sometimes it's delivered by those who promise to protect you, and the scars it leaves aren't just on bodies, but on minds, trust, and history itself. CIA use of ESP in interrogations. In a strange and deeply unsettling corner of CIA history, the agency explored the use of extrasensory perception, ESP, not just for spying, but for breaking minds. This wasn't about torture devices or truth serums. It was about reading thoughts, uncovering secrets, and manipulating fear using nothing but perception beyond the five senses. And for a time, they believed it might actually work. Declassified memos from the 1970s revealed that the CIA seriously examined the idea that certain individuals called sensitives or intuitives could psychically extract information from prisoners during interrogation. The premise was simple but chilling. If you could access what a person was thinking or feeling without them speaking, you could bypass resistance completely. No pain, no drugs, just quiet psychological intrusion. The documents described tests where psychics sat near prisoners and attempted to tune in to unspoken answers, names, numbers, locations, intentions. Sometimes they tried to implant thoughts, confuse memories, or push feelings of guilt and fear into the subject's awareness. Even when it failed, the CIA noted something disturbing. Just the suggestion that someone could read your mind was enough to destabilize people. Interrogation became a mind game with no escape. Targets began to question what they had thought, what they had revealed, and whether their own minds had betrayed them. The psychological damage wasn't from what the ESP revealed, but from what it made people believe was possible. It induced paranoia, doubt, breakdown. For the CIA, ESP wasn't just an experiment in the supernatural. It was a weaponized fear of being known, down to your most private, hidden thought. In a room with no questions, just silence, the mind would begin to unravel. Because what if someone could hear the things you can't even say out loud? COINTELPRO psychological warfare. COINTELPRO was not just surveillance. It was psychological warfare, waged by the FBI against its own citizens. From the 1950s through the 1970s, under the guise of national security, the FBI launched a brutal, hidden campaign to destroy social movements from within, not by force, but by infecting them with paranoia, betrayal, and silence. Targeting civil rights leaders, black activists, anti-war protesters, Native organizers, feminists, and anyone deemed subversive, COINTELPRO used every psychological tactic imaginable to discredit, divide, and neutralize. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was told to kill himself in an anonymous letter. Black Panther leaders had their homes raided at dawn, while false rumors of infiltration spread through their ranks. Friends began to suspect each other. Movements shattered under the weight of suspicion that someone was working for the feds, because someone usually was. Fake letters were sent to spark feuds. Informants whispered lies about affairs, betrayals, stolen money. Entire newspapers were fabricated. Employers were called. Marriages were ruined. Lives were dismantled, not with bullets, but with doubt. The brilliance and horror of COINTELPRO was that it left no battlefield. The enemy was never visible. It made people question their allies, their purpose, even their sanity. Fear became internalized. The war wasn't just fought against the state. It was fought inside the minds of those brave enough to resist it. And when they finally broke, the public saw only the collapse, not the invisible hand that crushed them. COINTELPRO proved that you don't need to silence someone with a gun when you can make them doubt their voice was ever real to begin with. Project Camelot. Project Camelot was the U.S. Army's attempt to turn social science into a weapon, to predict, control, and, if necessary, crush revolutions before they ever began. Launched in 1964 under the banner of research, Camelot aimed to study the anatomy of political unrest in foreign nations. But beneath the surface, it was something far more disturbing, an effort to engineer obedience on a global scale using psychology, sociology, and data like tools of war. The official story was that Camelot would help understand why revolutions happen by analyzing economic factors, cultural trends, group dynamics, and ideological shifts. But the true purpose was not understanding. It was intervention. The U.S. wanted to detect the spark of revolution before it ignited, and then smother it through propaganda, infiltration, psychological manipulation, or even regime change. Camelot researchers collected data on civilian populations, built predictive models of rebellion, and profiled key dissident leaders. They assessed how people respond to fear, loss, poverty, or government pressure. They weren't just analyzing mass behavior. They were looking for pressure points, where to push, when to strike, how to fracture solidarity before it could become a movement. The project fell apart publicly after being exposed in Chile, where local academics realized they were being studied as potential subversives under the guise of research. The backlash was massive, but the ideas behind Camelot didn't die. They simply went deeper underground. Camelot revealed a terrifying truth, that revolution could be studied like a disease, and once diagnosed, it could be treated with fear, with lies, with targeted psychological operations. In a world shaped by control, this wasn't science. It was preemptive mind warfare. Dark Winter Simulation. The Dark Winter Simulation was not a prediction. It was a psychological stress test on the soul of a nation. Conducted in June 2001 by U.S. intelligence, military, and public health officials, this chilling exercise was designed to simulate a bioterror attack on American soil. The scenario? A smallpox outbreak spreading rapidly, triggering mass hysteria, political chaos, and moral collapse. But what made Dark Winter so disturbing wasn't the virus, it was what it revealed about us. As the simulation unfolded, decision-makers were thrust into a nightmare. Hospitals overwhelmed, vaccines scarce, citizens rioting in the streets. Governors demanded military lockdowns. Martial law was debated. Civil liberties were suspended. A trusted media landscape fractured into panic and disinformation. And through it all, A single question echoed: how do you control a population when fear spreads faster than disease? Dark Winter wasn't about curing smallpox. It was about engineering response, studying how fear corrodes trust, how panic reshapes obedience, and how quickly a free society begs to be controlled. The exercise exposed the fragility of the American psyche. In the face of invisible death, people didn't just fear for their lives, they turned on their neighbors, questioned their leaders, and crumbled under the weight of uncertainty. It showed that truth becomes fluid during crisis, that facts lose power when fear takes hold, and that the greatest threat to order isn't always the enemy outside. It's the chaos that blooms inside a terrified, desperate public. Dark Winter ended with martial law, media blackouts, and a broken government. It wasn't real, but it was a mirror, and what stared back was terrifyingly human. Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods is one of the most haunting revelations ever pulled from declassified U.S. military archives, a psychological operation so cold-blooded, so calculated, that it bordered on fiction, but it was real. Drafted in 1962 by the U.S. Department of Defense and presented to President Kennedy by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the plan proposed using false flag terror attacks against American citizens to justify a war with Cuba. The idea was simple: stage acts of terror, blame them on the Cuban government, and use the manufactured outrage to launch a full-scale invasion. But the details were horrifying. The memo proposed faking or orchestrating the hijacking of civilian planes, sinking refugee boats, bombing U.S. cities, and murdering Americans, all in ways that could be pinned on Fidel Castro. These weren't theoretical ideas. They were scripted psychological warfare operations designed to manipulate mass emotion. The goal wasn't just military victory, it was perception control. Make the public feel threatened, betrayed, enraged. Force them into a binary: submit to war or let the enemy win. The plan hinged on exploiting fear to shape behavior, turning grief into justification, pain into obedience. Operation Northwoods was ultimately rejected by President Kennedy, but the fact that it was ever conceived, signed, and formally submitted proves something deeply unsettling: that psychological manipulation of the American people wasn't just possible, it was considered strategic policy. Northwoods didn't need tanks or bullets. It needed stories, symbols, dead bodies in the right place at the right time, and a lie strong enough to become national truth. Because sometimes the war doesn't start with the enemy. It starts with a script. Behavioral Drift Studies, Lifton Cameron. The behavioral drift studies conducted by Dr. Robert J. Lifton and Dr. Ewan Cameron were not just psychological research. They were experiments in erasing the self. Under the guise of mental health treatment and academic inquiry, these doctors explored how far the human mind could be broken, reshaped, and stripped of identity. What they found and what they did still echoes like a scream sealed behind hospital walls. Dr. Cameron, working at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal with CIA funding through the Human Ecology Fund, developed a technique he called psychic driving. It involved forcibly emptying a person's mind of thought, memory, even self-recognition through massive doses of LSD, prolonged sensory deprivation, forced comas, and relentless electroshock. Once the patient was emptied, a new identity could be driven in using endless recorded messages played on loops for hours or days. These weren't therapeutic affirmations. They were psychological invasions. Subjects were often young women, some seeking treatment for depression or anxiety. They left unable to speak, remember their children, or even recognize their own names. Their minds had drifted, not by accident, but by design. Lifton's accompanying theories of thought reform, drawn from studying prisoners of war and victims of totalitarian indoctrination, described how identities could be unmade by trauma, disorientation, and isolation. Together, Cameron and Lifton mapped the road to psychological annihilation. What haunts these studies isn't just the suffering, but the ambition that a human soul could be treated like a chalkboard, wiped clean and rewritten. It wasn't healing, it was obliteration, disguised as science. And the ones who emerged from it weren't patients anymore. They were ghosts of who they used to be. E-meter, CIA interest. The E-meter, a device developed by the Church of Scientology, may appear harmless at first glance, a pseudo-scientific gadget used in spiritual auditing sessions, but behind its blinking lights and vague promises of emotional cleansing lies something far more insidious, a tool of psychological excavation capable of exposing and possibly manipulating the deepest layers of a person's mind. And the CIA took notice. Declassified intelligence documents and insider leaks suggest that during the height of MKUltra and psychological warfare experimentation, the CIA observed and possibly studied the E-meter and Scientology's auditing techniques with growing interest, not because of their theology, but because of their efficacy in control. The E-meter, which measures changes in skin conductance, a proxy for emotional arousal, was being used to force confessions, access trauma, and reshape beliefs outside the framework of traditional therapy without any clinical safeguards. In the hands of Scientology, the E-meter acted as both lie detector and truth excavator, but in the eyes of the CIA, it had darker potential. It could track a person's guilt, fear, or shame in real time. It could bypass verbal defenses. It could systematically strip a subject of psychological armor, one painful memory at a time. Combine this with interrogation techniques, drugs, or hypnotic suggestion, and you have a machine-enhanced method of mental deconstruction. The CIA's interest wasn't spiritual, it was strategic. The E-meter symbolized the merging of belief, technology, and coercion. And if a religious movement could use it to build loyalty, rewrite identity, and silence dissent, imagine what an intelligence agency could do with it in the shadows. It wasn't just a question of science, it was a test. How much of a mind can be measured and then remade? DoD's Influence Operations. The Department of Defense's influence operations, known as IO, are not campaigns of bullets or bombs, but of belief. They operate silently, shaping how populations think, feel, and react. Behind official language like perception management or strategic communication lies a deeper truth. IO is the military's structured effort to control the human mind in real time, whether on foreign soil or at home. Influence operations are an umbrella for psychological warfare, propaganda, deception, disinformation, and cyber manipulation. The goal is not to destroy the enemy physically, it's to shatter their trust, mislead their decisions, and manipulate their reality. In practice, IO can include false news planted in media outlets, social media bot networks spreading chaos, staged videos designed to go viral, or subtle cues inserted into online discourse to divide communities and erode belief in institutions. The most disturbing element is how seamless it is. You don't know when you've been influenced. You just suddenly believe something new. A threat that wasn't there. A doubt that grows louder. A loyalty that slips. The military targets not only enemies, but key audiences, which can mean foreign civilians, local allies, or even domestic populations during times of unrest. And once these operations go digital, they don't need borders. A meme becomes a weapon. A hashtag becomes a psyop. Your scroll becomes their battlefield. DoD's IO strategy doesn't just aim to win wars. It aims to preempt them by colonizing the thoughts of a people before a single shot is fired. It's not about what's true. It's about what feels true. And when you believe it, they've already won. 5G psychological impact research. The rise of 5G technology promised faster data, seamless connectivity, and a revolution in communication. But beneath the excitement, a quieter, more disturbing narrative emerged. Allegations that intelligence agencies and defense contractors were conducting covert studies into how electromagnetic EM fields emitted by 5G infrastructure could affect not just the body, but the mind. According to leaked reports and whistleblower claims, psychological impact research surrounding 5G didn't stop at health effects. It focused on behavior, emotion, and the subtle manipulation of mood states via continuous, low-level exposure to high-frequency EM radiation. The central hypothesis was chilling, that by pulsing electromagnetic fields at precise frequencies and rhythms, it may be possible to nudge human emotional baselines, inducing anxiety, lethargy, agitation, or even compliance without the target ever realizing they've been influenced. The research allegedly involved population-wide studies disguised as telecommunications infrastructure rollouts. Subjects, ordinary people in urban areas, were unknowingly exposed to modulated 5G signals during sleep, during stress, and in social settings, while data on emotional responses, heart rate variability, and behavioral shifts were collected through wearable tech, social media patterns, and biometric tracking. The implications? Untraceable influence, psychological warfare without sound, sight, or contact, a frequency-based mechanism capable of softening resistance, reducing group morale, or increasing irritability, all without a single word being spoken. While no government has confirmed these studies, the silence surrounding them is deafening. If mood can be altered by invisible waves, then your thoughts are not entirely your own, and every tower you walk past could be more than a signal booster. It could be part of an invisible system tuned not just to your phone, but to your mind. BioAPI Hypotheses. The BioAPI hypothesis is one of the most chilling and speculative theories circulating in the shadows of advanced bioengineering and surveillance. It suggests that somewhere deep within black-budget military and intelligence programs, a hidden initiative has succeeded in developing a biological application programming interface, a nanoscale system secretly deployed inside the human body, capable of influencing thought, emotion, and behavior remotely. At the core of the hypothesis is this: nanotechnology delivered through air, water, food, or injections enters the bloodstream, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and embeds itself inside neural structures. Once in place, this nanotech forms a soft, internal interface that responds to coded signals, RFID, microwave, or satellite-based, essentially turning the brain into a remotely programmable machine. Supporters of the theory point to advances in neural dust, graphene-based biochips, and real-world DARPA projects focusing on brain-computer interfaces, but the BioAPI hypothesis goes further, claiming this tech has already been deployed, without consent, on entire populations. Those affected report hearing voices, emotional swings without cause, vivid implanted dreams, or artificial thoughts that don't feel like their own. The idea is not just surveillance, it's intervention, control of moods, suppression of dissent, behavior nudging, entire belief systems rewritten, not by argument or propaganda, but by signal. There's no official confirmation, no white paper, only fragments, leaked patents, whistleblower claims, erratic testimonies dismissed as delusional. But if even a sliver is true, the BioAPI represents something unprecedented: total inner access, the end of privacy, not just of what you say or do, but of what you are, your mind, wired, your thoughts, not your own, and the interface already installed. U.S. military's non-lethal psychological weapons. Beneath the surface of conventional warfare lies a more insidious arsenal, non-lethal psychological weapons designed not to kill, but to fracture the human mind. These are tools that leave no visible wounds, yet devastate morale, willpower, and perception. The U.S. military has spent decades developing such weapons, technologies that use sound, smell, and even hallucinations to control behavior and induce emotional collapse. Imagine a battlefield where soldiers suddenly hear voices screaming in their heads, panic-inducing, incomprehensible, or mimicking loved ones in distress. This is the aim of acoustic weapons, like infrasound and directional audio devices that target individuals with frequencies below human hearing, but strong enough to trigger dread, nausea, and internal chaos. Some can focus a voice into a single person's ear across a crowd, creating confusion, fear, and isolation. Now add olfactory warfare, weaponized smell. Scientists have created synthetic scents engineered to provoke disgust, disorientation, or irrational aggression. Scents that mimic rotting flesh, burning hair, or human waste have been tested for crowd control and battlefield use. These smells don't just offend, they hijack primal survival responses, sending the brain into panic mode. Then there are hallucinogenic agents, a legacy of the MK-Ultra era. Aerosolized psychedelics like BZ or modified LSD compounds have been tested to cloud cognition, disrupt time perception, and induce paranoia. Entire enemy units could be rendered useless, not by bullets, but by false realities. These weapons exist in the shadow space between war and torture. They don't just control movement, they invade thought. The body remains standing, but the mind begins to fall. And in psychological warfare, that is the true victory, when your enemy can no longer trust what they see, hear, smell, or even believe. CIA's use of LSD in agent recruitment. The CIA's use of LSD wasn't just about interrogation or mind control. It was about seduction. In the covert depths of MK-Ultra and related programs, the agency discovered that psychedelics could do more than confuse. They could reveal, open, and even transform. And so a new tactic was born, using LSD not to shatter a target's mind, but to awaken it, on the CIA's terms. During the 1950s and 60s, LSD was a mystery. It had no cultural context, no guideposts, just raw, unfiltered access to the subconscious. CIA operatives began to realize that when a person was carefully dosed in a controlled setting, they often experienced what they described as spiritual rebirth, ego dissolution, emotional clarity, a sudden, intense belief in purpose or mission. And that's when the agency saw the opportunity. What if they could create a controlled awakening and tie it to recruitment? Targets were selected for their openness, idealism, or psychological vulnerability. They were invited to private gatherings, sometimes under the guise of intellectual salons or spiritual retreats. Without their knowledge, LSD was administered. What followed was often a profound inner experience, visions, realizations, a feeling of cosmic insight. And in that euphoric aftermath, CIA handlers were there, offering meaning, belonging, and a higher purpose. The goal was simple: replace confusion with clarity and then offer the CIA as the path forward. It wasn't force, it was enchantment. And it worked. Some individuals, poets, scientists, foreign operatives, became willing assets, believing they had seen a deeper truth. The horror, that truth was scripted, not found. The mind-altering journey they trusted had a destination planned from the very first drop. Psychic spying under INSCOM, U.S. Army. In a world obsessed with satellites, signals, and surveillance, the U.S. Army's Intelligence and Security Command, INSCOM, dared to tap into something far stranger: the human mind as a spy tool. Through a series of classified programs stretching across decades, INSCOM led America's most bizarre and deeply secretive efforts in psychic spying, attempting to extract intelligence not through gadgets or drones, but through consciousness itself. Under programs like Grill Flame, Center Lane, and later as part of Project Stargate, INSCOM trained selected soldiers and civilians in the art of remote viewing, the claimed ability to mentally access information from distant places, locked rooms, and even hostile bunkers without ever leaving a secure facility. These psychic operatives, dubbed viewers, would enter deep meditative states, guided only by cryptic coordinates or random numbers, and attempt to describe secret enemy installations, hidden weapons, or missing persons. And often, they succeeded. Their visions were sometimes eerily accurate. Details of Soviet submarine construction, hostages' whereabouts, and underground nuclear facilities emerged from these sessions, so consistently that INSCOM, despite ridicule from mainstream science, poured millions into perfecting the skill. These weren't mystics in robes, they were soldiers, government operatives, war-trained minds reaching across invisible dimensions. Some viewers reported terrifying experiences, seeing death before it happened, hearing foreign thoughts, feeling emotions that weren't theirs. Others refused to continue, haunted by psychic residue that clung to them for weeks. INSCOM didn't just explore psychic spying, they militarized it. In a world where information is power, they asked, what if the mind could become the ultimate surveillance tool? And more chillingly, what if the mind could be used to influence, not just observe? The boundary between intelligence and the unknown had never been thinner. DARPA's predictive behavioral models. DARPA's predictive behavioral models are not about watching what you do, they're about knowing what you'll do next, often before you even think about it. Built at the intersection of artificial intelligence, psychology, and mass surveillance, these models are designed to simulate your mind in real time. Every action, pause, click, or hesitation becomes data fed into neural networks that attempt to forecast not just decisions but desires, fears, and vulnerabilities. Imagine a digital twin of yourself, created by algorithms, tracking your behavior through social media, GPS movements, browsing habits, and emotional reactions. Then imagine that twin being tested thousands of times in simulated scenarios. How would you react to a threat, a scandal, a crisis? Would you riot, conform, submit? DARPA's systems aren't just making predictions, they're running simulations of your soul. These models are part of a broader initiative to develop decision assistance tools for military and national security purposes, but the implications go far deeper. With enough data, AI can identify when someone is likely to become radicalized, depressed, or even disloyal. It can spot hesitation in a soldier, dissent in a citizen, or instability in a leader, all before it ever surfaces. And once your behavior is predictable, it becomes malleable. These models don't just watch, they shape. They can suggest content, manipulate timing, even create coincidences that push you in a desired direction, all invisibly, all in real time. This is the quiet conquest of the individual, not through force, but through forecast. You don't lose your freedom, you just never notice it being rewritten, one perfectly predicted choice at a time. Project Jason. Project Jason wasn't conducted in a lab or a battlefield. It was born in back rooms, black budgets, and minds too brilliant to be ignored. Formed in the late 1950s, Jason was an elite, invitation-only group of top American scientists, physicists, psychologists, engineers, hand-picked to serve as the Pentagon's secret brain trust. Officially, they were advisors. In reality, they were strategists of the unseen, called in to solve the most morally gray, ethically explosive questions of psychological warfare. When the U.S. government needed answers about controlling crowds, breaking enemy morale, or subtly steering the beliefs of millions, it didn't always turn to generals. It turned to Jason. These scientists designed psychological weapons that could change behavior on a mass scale, tools that manipulated perception, rewired belief systems, or demoralized entire populations without firing a shot. They analyze how fear spreads like wildfire, how despair can be planted with whispers, and how authority becomes godlike when paired with the right technology and narrative. One of their most controversial assignments involves studying how to influence enemy thought through electromagnetic fields, drugs, and media manipulation. They explored ways to induce compliance, confusion, or collapse in adversaries while keeping American hands clean. They even advised on how to psychologically paralyze populations in the event of rebellion or nuclear standoff. But the most unsettling truth? Jason didn't operate in secret labs. They worked inside universities, respected think tanks, quiet offices. Their identities were hidden behind tenure and prestige, yet they shaped the psychological weapons of war from behind a curtain of intellect. Project Jason proved that the deadliest weapons don't always explode. Some sit in silence, crafted by minds that know how to break others without ever touching them. Influence operations in social media. Influence operations in social media, coordinated under programs like the Information Operations Task Force, IOTF, represent the weaponization of your feed. Beneath every scroll, share, and like lies a battlefield, one where nations, intelligence agencies, and digital mercenaries wage psychological warfare disguised as content. The goal is not to inform, it is to influence, quietly, surgically, and absolutely. IOTF was designed to master this space, using real-time data analytics, psychographic profiling, and AI-driven narrative injection. The task force crafts stories and images tailored to manipulate belief and behavior at the individual level. These are not ads or obvious propaganda. They are memes, fake tweets, emotional posts, and viral videos engineered to trigger your specific biases, fears, and identity cues. You don't even realize it's happening. If you lean left, you're fed carefully curated rage bait to push you further. If you lean right, you're shown just enough fear to cement suspicion. If you're undecided, the feed becomes confusion until you disengage or fall into the trap of false clarity. The algorithm becomes a scalpel, carving your mind into predictable patterns that can be guided toward apathy, division, or obedience. This isn't theory. This is doctrine. Internal military documents detail how narrative control via social platforms can erode trust, stir unrest, or pacify resistance. The platform you use to express yourself becomes the very system used to rewrite you. The most terrifying part? You feel like you've chosen your beliefs, but in truth, they were fed to you, optimized, scheduled, and deployed with clinical precision. You are not the audience. You are the target. Operation Earnest Voice. Operation Earnest Voice is the U.S. military's psychological warfare brought into the digital age, a covert program that didn't aim to destroy physical targets, but to infiltrate minds and conversations across the internet. Officially described as a counter-propaganda initiative in the Middle East, its true function runs much deeper: the creation and deployment of fake online personas to manipulate public perception, sway political sentiment, and control narratives globally. Run by U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, the operation involves software capable of managing multiple sock puppet accounts, each one a believable digital identity, complete with personal histories, cultural backgrounds, and regional language fluency. These weren't crude bots. They were engineered PSYOP soldiers, programmed to blend into forums, comment sections, and social platforms, quietly pushing pro-American viewpoints, discrediting critics, and stirring division where it served strategic interests. The brilliance of Earnest Voice was in its invisibility. It didn't need censorship. It didn't need to silence dissent. It simply overwhelmed truth with noise, turning every public debate into a maze of confusion, tribalism, and false consensus. You'd never know you were arguing with an algorithmic ghost. And this wasn't limited to foreign populations. While officially aimed at counterterrorism abroad, critics warned of its potential and probable use domestically, shaping elections, polarizing communities, and planting ideological landmines in the minds of civilians scrolling through their phones. Ernest's voice proved that war no longer requires bullets. A comment, a retweet, a perfectly timed lie can carry the same psychological payload as a missile, except the target never sees it coming. Because in the new battlefield, your enemy isn't at your border, it's in your feed. NSA's PRISM Psychological Analysis. NSA's PRISM program was never just about surveillance, it was about seeing inside you. On the surface, it was a data collection effort, pulling information from tech giants like Google, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. But behind the curtain, PRISM evolved into something far more intimate, a psychological profiling engine designed to predict not only what you might do, but who you really are. Through metadata, the invisible trails left by your emails, calls, search history, location, and even your silence, PRISM could build a behavioral portrait more accurate than anything you'd confess. Every timestamp, every delay in response, every shift in tone became data points, not content, context, and that's where the mind reveals itself. NSA analysts, aided by machine learning and cognitive algorithms, began running predictive models to identify emotional states, stress levels, risk factors, loyalty, and political leanings. They could determine if you were angry at your government, drifting toward radical ideologies, cheating on a spouse, or slipping into depression, not by reading your messages, but by watching how you moved around them. It wasn't surveillance, it was psychoanalysis at scale. These profiles could flag potential threats before they acted, or nudge a target with precision disinformation, manipulation, or targeted messaging. The more data PRISM collected, the more accurately it could anticipate your decisions, reactions, even the exact moment you'd become vulnerable. And the scariest part? You never gave consent. You never saw the questions, but your mind was answering all of them every day, because in the world of PRISM, your thoughts aren't private, they're predictable, and your patterns don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the system. Behavioral economics in military psyops. In modern warfare, the battlefield is not just terrain, it's the human mind, and within that mind lie predictable flaws, cognitive biases that military psychological operations, psyops, have learned to exploit with ruthless precision. By borrowing tools from behavioral economics, the military has weaponized our irrational thinking patterns, turning invisible mental shortcuts into traps for enemy decision-making. Every human brain is wired to take cognitive shortcuts, heuristics, when under stress. We fear loss more than we value gain. We conform to social proof. We choose the familiar over the correct. In psyops, these tendencies are not obstacles. They are opportunities. Imagine enemy commanders receiving false intelligence that plays on loss aversion, tricking them into defending a worthless location out of fear of giving something up, or troops exposed to propaganda that mimics authority bias, quoting fake high-ranking officials to create compliance, or anchoring bias, where initial misinformation shapes every future decision, making them underestimate threats or overcommit resources. Even colors, sounds, and repeated slogans are chosen to exploit availability bias, flooding the mind with specific imagery so it feels like the only truth. The enemy begins to question their allies, mistrust their instincts, and doubt every move. This isn't brute force, it's behavioral finesse. PsyOps teams use advanced modeling to predict how targets will act, not if they're rational, but if they're human. What's most chilling, these techniques work just as well on civilians. Whether in war zones or through news feeds, behavioral economics has become a silent weapon, a scalpel, not a sword, shaping choices, guiding reactions, and crafting beliefs without ever raising suspicion. In the war for perception, your own brain becomes the battlefield. Behavioral health as a weapon. Behavioral health was once a shield, an effort to understand, to heal, to protect the fragile edges of the human psyche. But under psychops, it became a weapon, a surgical, invisible instrument of psychological warfare. Behind classified doors, intelligence agencies discovered that what breaks a person isn't always force. It's being told that they're already broken. Psychops allegedly refers to the covert use of mental health records, diagnoses, and personal trauma histories as tools to destabilize, discredit, and destroy individuals seen as threats, activists, whistleblowers, or even internal dissenters. The tactic was subtle but devastating. Access a subject's psychological profile, then use that information to manipulate their environment until they implode. A person with anxiety would be flooded with anonymous threats, just enough to seem real, never enough to prove. Someone with past trauma might find themselves gaslit, isolated, pushed toward breakdown. Depression would be amplified. Paranoia would be confirmed. Friends would doubt them. Authorities would dismiss them. Maybe it's all in your head, they'd say, when it was engineered to be there. Medical records, once confidential, became tactical blueprints. Therapists became intelligence assets. Medications were tampered with. Social workers became unknowing operatives in a war of psychological attrition. It wasn't assassination. It was erasure of credibility, stability, identity. The goal wasn't just silence. It was collapse. No courtroom, no gunshot, just a person unraveling, questioning their reality until no one, including themselves, could trust their voice. And the most terrifying thing, it leaves no trace, no bruise, just the echo of a life quietly dismantled by the very system that once claimed to heal it. Synthetic telepathy. Experiments. Synthetic telepathy is the terrifying frontier where thought itself becomes weaponized, not metaphorically, but literally. These are real-world military and intelligence experiments aiming to read, decode, and eventually transmit thoughts between minds using machines. No words, no voice, just pure neural intent, intercepted and replicated. The concept sounds like science fiction, but it has been pursued with intense interest by DARPA, the U.S. military, and shadowy defense labs since at least the early 2000s. Their goal? Develop technologies that allow soldiers to silently communicate in the field, mind to mind, by detecting brainwave patterns through EEG, neural implants, or wearable neural interfaces. But that's only the surface. Declassified reports and patent trails point to more invasive ambitions, devices that can intercept brain signals from a distance, decode them into language or commands, and possibly even beam new instructions back into the brain. It's not mind reading, it's mind hacking. In controlled experiments, test subjects were trained to think specific phrases or actions which machines then translated into digital signals. These signals could, in theory, be transmitted to another brain, bypassing speech and muscle entirely. But what happens when that system is turned outward onto civilians, prisoners, or even enemies? Could thoughts be implanted? Could mental privacy be shattered? Early trials showed promise and side effects: confusion, headaches, hallucinations, and emotional disturbances. Some test subjects reported hearing voices that weren't their own. Others felt influence, as if thoughts were arriving uninvited. Synthetic telepathy isn't just communication, it's penetration into the last private space you own. If successful, it won't just break barriers, it will erase them, and when your thoughts are no longer yours alone, who are you really? DARPA's cognitive warfare programs. DARPA's cognitive warfare programs are not about defeating armies, they're about occupying minds. In these black budget projects, The enemy isn't just foreign combatants, it's cognition itself. These programs aim to dominate perception, belief, and behavior through a seamless fusion of cutting-edge technology, neuroscience, and mass media manipulation, not with guns, with ideas, engineered, weaponized, and deployed with surgical precision. Cognitive warfare views the human brain as a battlefield where thoughts can be infiltrated, emotions hijacked, and decision-making rerouted. DARPA's programs are designed to exploit every vulnerability in how we process information. Using neuro-linguistic patterning, deep learning algorithms, and emotional profiling, they craft messages that bypass logic and trigger instinct, fear, outrage, trust, despair. All of it is calculated. Imagine media stories tailored to your exact psychological makeup, delivered by AI systems that know when you're tired, angry, lonely, or scared. Imagine augmented reality layers that reinforce false beliefs. Imagine implants, wearables, or brain-machine interfaces that influence your behavior without you realizing it. This is not tomorrow's threat. It's today's experiment. DARPA's vision is not just to understand the mind, it's to dominate it, to control how populations think en masse, using information as a virus that spreads invisibly. And once a belief takes root, no matter how false, it becomes a fortress. You'll defend it, fight for it, even die for it. That's the true power of cognitive warfare. It turns you into the weapon. This isn't just propaganda, it's psychological occupation, and by the time you question what's real, your mind may already be under new management. CIA's use of AI in emotional manipulation. The CIA has long mastered the art of human influence, but now, with artificial intelligence, it's no longer guessing what you might feel. It's reading you in real time. Through advanced AI-driven surveillance tools, the agency is reportedly developing systems that monitor facial expressions, voice inflection, biometric signals, and behavioral patterns to detect precise emotional states, not just whether you're happy or sad, but if you're on edge, vulnerable, ready to believe, or close to breaking. But it doesn't stop at reading emotions. The true power lies in shaping them. By combining mood analysis with algorithmic feedback loops, AI systems can craft messages, texts, images, sounds, even social media interactions, tailored to push you in a desired direction. Are you anxious? Feed content that subtly offers relief through compliance. Are you angry? Present a villain to blame. Are you uncertain? Insert false consensus until you conform. And it all happens invisibly, so you believe your reaction is your own. These tools can be deployed through digital environments you trust: news, entertainment, social media, customer service bots. The AI doesn't need to lie. It only needs to know you better than you know yourself. Sources claim this tech has been tested on populations through simulated crisis events, online platforms, and social unrest scenarios. The AI learns not just how to predict behavior, but how to provoke it. The horror isn't in the code, it's in the intimacy, how deeply and silently this technology invades. Once your emotions are monitored, predicted, and adjusted by machines, resistance doesn't feel like rebellion. It feels like guilt, fear, or resignation. The machine doesn't force you to comply, it makes you want to. Military intelligence use of sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation is not just discomfort, it is extraction, erosion, submission. Within military intelligence circles, it has long been understood that robbing a person of sleep does far more than tire the body. It breaks the mind. But what's even more chilling is the evolution of this tactic, not just preventing sleep, but weaponizing dreams themselves, turning the unconscious into a battlefield where nightmares become tools of control. The technique begins with strategic sleep interruption, bright lights, freezing temperatures, disorienting noise, irregular feeding. Within 48 hours, the subject begins to lose grip on time, on memory, on self. Hallucinations bleed into waking life. Truth and fantasy merge. But this is where it goes deeper, because military psychologists learn something terrifying. Once a subject's REM sleep is disrupted long enough, when they finally do dream, the brain becomes hyper-receptive, like a raw nerve. In this state, carefully planted sounds, images, and whispered suggestions can burrow into the subconscious. Subjects report vivid, recurring nightmares, drowning, death, betrayal. But these aren't random. They're constructed, delivered through sound loops, visual flashes, or even voice-to-skull technology. The dream becomes a message, and the message becomes a command. It's interrogation without questions, torture without bruises. Subjects have confessed, broken down, or turned on allies after nothing more than days of sleeplessness and implanted fear. And when they're released, they often don't know what was done to them, only that something inside them is missing. Sleep is where we heal, where we remember who we are. Strip it away, and you don't just exhaust a person, you unmake them. Deepfake psychological impact testing. Deepfake psychological impact testing is not about faking videos, it's about faking reality itself. Behind the closed doors of intelligence agencies and military research labs, operatives are reportedly running controlled experiments to measure just how easily the human mind can be pushed into doubt, confusion, or even psychosis by fabricated media. These aren't mistakes or hoaxes. They are deliberately engineered false realities designed to study how people respond when the truth is made liquid. Using AI-generated audio and video, researchers simulate events that never happened. A politician admitting to crimes, a loved one saying things they never said, an enemy committing atrocities they never did. The goal? Not just to deceive, but to measure the emotional and cognitive collapse that follows. Subjects exposed to deepfake stimuli have reported memory distortion, heightened paranoia, social mistrust, and even dissociation. Some questioned whether their own memories were accurate. Others became emotionally detached, unable to reconcile the betrayal of their senses. In military trials, soldiers were shown videos of fake attacks or manipulated footage of their own commanders making false orders, then observed to see if they obeyed, resisted, or mentally fractured. This isn't manipulation, it's induced unreality. The most chilling discovery? Once the brain accepts a deepfake as real, even briefly, undoing that belief is nearly impossible. Doubt lingers, trust evaporates, and with enough exposure, even the concept of objective truth begins to die. Deepfake testing isn't just about war. It's about breaking the social contract with reality itself. Because if people no longer believe what they see, they no longer know who to follow, what to fight for, or who they really are. Nudge theory in governance. Nudge theory in governance is subtle, surgical, and dangerously effective. It's not about controlling people with force or law. It's about guiding them without their awareness, using subconscious cues to shape behavior in ways that feel like free will. Born from behavioral economics and quietly embraced by governments worldwide, nudge theory weaponizes choice architecture, the way options are presented, to steer public action without ever restricting it. You're not told what to do, you're nudged into doing it. Governments use it in everything from tax compliance to vaccination campaigns to voting behavior. Want people to save more money? Change the default retirement plan to opt-in. Want citizens to trust a policy? Phrase it with warmth and familiarity. Surround it with symbols of unity. Use colors that trigger safety and belonging. Want to push people into accepting surveillance? Nudge them through convenience, then frame it as their idea. What makes nudge theory chilling isn't the psychology, it's the invisibility. There's no debate, no force, no overt manipulation, just silent redirection. The path is laid so gently, so cleverly, that you never notice your own consent being orchestrated. In war zones, nudges shape loyalty. In public health, they shape obedience. In digital interfaces, they shape thought. One pixel moved, one phrase softened, one reminder delivered at just the right moment, and suddenly you comply. You believe you chose to obey, but the truth is far more disturbing. You were guided, one subconscious step at a time, no resistance, no awareness, just a smile, a click, and a mind slowly, silently rewritten. Edward Snowden's Revelations on Psych Surveillance. Edward Snowden's 2013 revelations shattered illusions, not just about privacy, but about how deeply the government understands you. The world learned that the NSA wasn't simply collecting emails or phone records, it was harvesting metadata, the invisible footprints of your digital life, to build something far more invasive, a psychological profile of you. Snowden exposed a system designed to watch how you communicate, not just what you say, who you call, when, how long you linger on a page, which articles you half read, which messages you don't send, how you scroll, how you pause, how you feel, because behind every click is emotion, and behind every habit is personality. The NSA, in partnership with global intelligence allies, developed algorithms that could turn this metadata into predictive behavioral models. They could identify if you were stressed, politically volatile, sexually conflicted, emotionally unstable, if you were a risk, or a target, or exploitable. This was not surveillance for protection, it was surveillance for preemption. The system sought to detect changes in thought patterns before dissent happened, before protest, before defection. And if you did act, the system already knew your friends, your weaknesses, your psychological soft spots. You were no longer just a citizen, you were a data set, a mind under glass. Snowden's leaks didn't just reveal a breach of privacy, they revealed a repurposing of technology into a mirror that reflects not your identity, but your potential to disobey. And in that mirror, the state doesn't just watch who you are, it quietly prepares for who you might become. Cambridge Analytica Psychographics. Cambridge Analytica didn't just mine your data, it hacked your personality. Behind its polished facade of political consultancy was one of the most invasive psychological operations of the digital age. Using psychographics, the profiling of individuals based on psychological traits like openness, neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, Cambridge Analytica learned how to predict and manipulate your behavior with terrifying accuracy. They didn't need your secrets, they just needed your likes. By harvesting Facebook data on a massive scale, often without consent, they created psychological blueprints of millions. These weren't demographic profiles, these were emotional schematics. They knew what scared you, what thrilled you, whether you responded to fear or hope, authority or rebellion, and they used that knowledge to build customized realities. Two people living in the same city could receive completely different political ads. One might see a message about protecting borders, another would see an emotional appeal about economic justice. The truth didn't matter, only the reaction did. It wasn't about convincing everyone, it was about targeting the malleable, those on the fence, those emotionally charged, those who didn't even know they were being played. The result? A flood of information that felt personal, relevant, urgent, true. And when millions of these nudges are delivered simultaneously, you don't just shift opinions, you tilt elections, you fracture reality. The horror of Cambridge Analytica isn't the data breach. It's the realization that your mind can be modeled and your decisions engineered, not by control, but by intimate precision. You thought you voted with your conscience, but your conscience was already mapped. Mindspace Behavioral Framework, UK. The Mindspace Behavioral Framework is one of the most quietly powerful psychological tools ever deployed by a modern government, not to punish, not to censor, but to steer. Developed by the UK's Behavioral Insights team, often called the Nudge Unit, Mindspace is not about controlling people overtly. It's about guiding their decisions without them realizing it, by exploiting the deepest quirks of human cognition. Mindspace is built around 9 behavioral levers: messenger, incentives, norms, defaults, salience, priming, affect, commitments, and ego. On the surface, these are just psychological principles, but in practice, they become a menu of subconscious manipulation used to shape everything from public health compliance to tax honesty, social behavior, and even political sentiment. It works because it never asks for your consent. If the government wants more people to follow a law, they might make it the default option. If they want you to get vaccinated, they'll show you that most people already have. If they want to trigger fear, guilt, pride, or trust, they'll adjust the messenger, not the message. It's not coercion, it's invisible influence, and it's shockingly effective. Mindspace isn't just policy, it's psychological architecture. Once installed, people change not because they were convinced, but because they were nudged, emotionally, socially, unconsciously. The public believes it acted freely, while the state engineers the outcome. The most dangerous part, it feels harmless, ethical, even helpful, but beneath its soft touch lies a chilling truth. You were never asked, you were only guided, and you may never realize how far you've been led until the door behind you quietly locks. Behavioral Insights Team, UK Nudge Unit. The Behavioral Insights Team, infamously dubbed the UK's Nudge Unit, was not born in a war room, but in a government office. Its weapon wasn't propaganda or surveillance, it was behavioral science. Created to subtly steer public behavior without force or law, this unit introduced a new era of governance, where psychology becomes policy, and the human mind is the lever of statecraft. The idea was simple and deeply unsettling. By understanding how people actually think, irrationally, emotionally, habitually, governments could nudge them toward desired actions without them ever realizing. It wasn't about telling citizens what to do, it was about designing environments where the right choice became the easy, default, or emotionally satisfying one. Want people to pay taxes on time? Send letters that say, 9 out of 10 people in your neighborhood already have. Want to reduce hospital wait times? Reword appointment texts to trigger guilt. Want to increase voter turnout? Say you are being studied for civic engagement. The words, the timing, even the font could tip behavior. It worked brilliantly, but success came with a quiet cost because the nudge unit proved something governments had long hoped was true. You don't need to control people with force when you can control them with design. Autonomy becomes an illusion, consent becomes manufactured, and the line between governance and manipulation begins to dissolve. You follow the signs, make the right decisions, feel like a good citizen, but behind it all is a system that knows why you act and how to make sure you never realize you didn't choose it at all. DARPA's Life Log was a project so eerily prophetic, it reads like a blueprint for the very world we now live in. Launched in the early 2000s, LifeLog aimed to create a total digital diary of a person's life, a constantly updating record of everything they did, said, saw, felt, or thought. Every website visited, purchase made, conversation held, photo taken, and physical movement tracked and stored forever. Officially, it was described as a behavioral capture project to help machines understand human experience, but beneath that sterile language was a psychological surveillance system of unimaginable power. LifeLog sought to turn people into fully mapped consciousness streams where AI could analyze patterns of emotion, belief, and decision-making, not just in the moment, but across years. It wasn't about watching people. It was about understanding and predicting them, who they loved, what made them angry, what fears could be triggered, what content would shape them, how to break them, how to influence them, quietly, surgically. Then, in February 2004, DARPA abruptly canceled the project. No explanation, no follow-up. Coincidentally, the very same day Facebook launched. Whether connected or not, the parallels are haunting. Today's social media platforms track every click, every friend, every mood shift, every blink of interest. The data is monetized, yes, but it's also weaponized for marketing, manipulation, political influence, and more. LifeLog didn't vanish. It simply went private. What began as a military experiment became our digital reality, and most people handed over their data willingly, believing they were sharing, not realizing they were training a system to know them better than they know themselves. Mood management theory, CIA media research. Mood management theory began as a benign psychological concept, an idea that people subconsciously choose media content to regulate their emotions. But when the CIA took notice, it mutated into something far more dangerous, a system for engineering public sentiment, one broadcast, headline, and soundbite at a time. The CIA's interest wasn't entertainment, it was control. They understood that emotions, not facts, drive behavior. Fear makes people compliant. Anger makes them reactive. Hope can rally them to causes they don't fully understand. By studying how different media types influence mood, the agency began crafting strategies to inject specific emotional tones into the public consciousness and do it invisibly. If a nation needed to go to war, the public would be fed anxiety-inducing coverage, ominous music, slow-motion visuals, selective violence, and carefully edited expert analysis. If a scandal needed to be buried, distractions would be timed for maximum emotional relief, celebrity meltdowns, feel-good stories, or orchestrated viral content. You weren't just informed, you were emotionally conditioned. The theory's brilliance lies in its subtlety. No one questions why they click on a story that matches their mood, but the content was likely placed there on purpose by systems trained to predict, feed, and steer your emotional state toward compliance or division, depending on what served the agenda. You thought you were managing your mood. In truth, your mood was managing you, and someone, somewhere, was managing that. One image, one tone, one perfect headline at a time. Cognitive infiltration. Cognitive infiltration is a term that sounds like dystopian fiction, but it came straight from the pages of an academic paper written by Cass Sunstein, a Harvard professor and former advisor to the Obama administration. In 2008, Sunstein proposed something quietly radical: to fight conspiracy theories and dangerous ideas, not with censorship or violence, but with mental sabotage. The strategy? Secretly insert agents into online communities, activist groups, and forums, not to silence them, but to steer them from within. He called it cognitive infiltration. The goal was to inject doubt, spread confusion, and destabilize group cohesion. These infiltrators wouldn't expose themselves as outsiders. They would pose as insiders, questioning the narrative subtly, supporting alternate explanations, introducing new theories that diluted the original message. The purpose wasn't just to debunk falsehoods. It was to fracture trust within the group itself. Imagine a group discussing government corruption or secret experiments. A new voice joins, reasonable, friendly, asking just the right questions. Then another. Suddenly, members begin to argue. Doubt creeps in. Leadership is questioned. The group weakens, not because they were proven wrong, but because belief was infiltrated, not debated. Sunstein's proposal was never confirmed as implemented, but the tactics he described aligned perfectly with real-world disinformation strategies used by intelligence agencies, whisper campaigns, sock puppet accounts, controlled dissent, all designed to make people question not just facts, but each other. Cognitive infiltration is psychological warfare at its most elegant. Weaponize the mind by turning belief into chaos. And when the enemy is truth itself, trust becomes the first casualty. CIA research into truth serums. the CIA's pursuit of so-called truth serums was not about finding justice. It was about finding control. For decades, the agency experimented with chemicals that could weaken the mind, dissolve resistance, and extract secrets not through violence, but through psychological surrender. They didn't want confessions. They wanted access to the private vault of a person's mind. The most infamous substance tested was sodium pentothal, but it didn't end there. The CIA's obsession expanded into LSD, scopolamine, mescaline, and custom-developed compounds, each chosen for their ability to confuse, disorient, and render the subject pliable, not truthful, compliant. Truth serums don't work like magic. They don't force honesty. They force dependence. Under the right dose, the subject begins to lose their grip on reality. Their ability to filter thought from speech unravels. They become desperate for comfort, approval, or simply the end of the mental spiral. In that chaos, they start talking, and in talking, they give away things they never meant to: names, plans, codes, vulnerabilities, sometimes truth, sometimes delusion, but always exposure. The CIA tested these drugs on prisoners, dissidents, even their own agents. Volunteers became victims. Memories were shattered, reputations collapsed, and some never came back. Mentally fractured, identities scrambled. But the true horror wasn't in the science. It was in the intent, the belief that a mind, your thoughts, your fears, your secrets could be chemically hacked, that honesty could be extracted not through trust, but through chemical betrayal. In the end, the CIA didn't find a perfect serum, but they did find something darker, the formula for breaking a person in a way no truth ever could. Wargaming psychological responses. RAND. Wargaming isn't just about tanks, missiles, or battlefields. It's about minds. And at RAND Corporation, one of the U.S. military's most influential think tanks, psychological response modeling has become an essential weapon of prediction and control. These simulations don't just forecast military outcomes, they map human emotion under pressure, simulating how entire populations, leaders, and soldiers will think, react, collapse, or comply in moments of crisis. RAND's wargames have quietly evolved from battlefield strategy to psychological architecture, where morale, fear, tribalism, nationalism, and even religious conviction are variables in a digital model. These simulations ask chilling questions. How do civilians react to a sudden act of terror in their city? Will soldiers continue to fight if they feel isolated, betrayed, or misled? What happens when an enemy's children are threatened or their leaders assassinated in broad daylight? In these controlled environments, every reaction is charted, every emotional trigger measured. Through social media behavior, historical trauma, and cultural symbols, RAND psychologists and strategists create personas of entire populations, then stress test them. They simulate panic, civil collapse, uprisings, despair, and they test the thresholds. How much fear will make people obey? How much hope will keep them from revolting? These models don't stay theoretical. They inform policy, propaganda, psyops, and even public health responses. RAND's war games are choreographing the theater of mass emotion, helping governments decide which levers to pull and when. It's not about winning battles, it's about knowing how to make people surrender before the first shot is fired. And in this war, your mind is both the terrain and the target. Behavioral surveillance using IoT. Behavioral surveillance using the Internet of Things, IoT, is the quietest invasion of privacy in human history because you invited it in. Your smart home, wearable tech, voice assistant, and even your refrigerator are no longer just tools. They're psychological sensors, silently collecting real-time data about your habits, routines, emotions, and decisions every second of the day. You don't need to speak, click, or type. The IoT watches how long you linger in the kitchen after a fight. It records the tremble in your voice when you're stressed. It notices when your lights turn on at 3 a.m. because you couldn't sleep. It tracks your walking pace, your breathing pattern, the way your thermostat changes when you're anxious. Every detail becomes data. Every data point becomes insight. And when combined, they create a psychological profile more accurate than any self-report or therapy session ever could. Governments and corporations are already exploring how this passive tracking can be used to predict mood swings, detect radicalization, flag potential dissent, or nudge behavior, all without your awareness. You don't see the camera, you don't hear the recording, you just go about your life unaware that your smart speaker just logged a spike in your frustration or that your watch is detecting patterns consistent with depression. This isn't surveillance in the old sense. It's intimate behavioral mapping where the walls around you and the devices on your body become agents of soft interrogation. You don't have to say anything. The IoT already knows how you feel. The most terrifying part? It's not what they collect. It's how easy it is to use what they learn against you. Surveillance cues for behavioral shaping. Surveillance cues for behavioral shaping aren't about what you see. They're about what you feel. Specifically, the subtle, constant feeling that you're being watched. And governments, law enforcement, and behavioral scientists have discovered something unnerving. Just the perception of surveillance can change how people think, move, and behave, not because they've been caught, but because they fear they might be. It's called the observer effect, and it's deeply rooted in human psychology. When people believe they're being watched, they become more obedient, more risk-averse, more socially conforming. The knowledge of potential observation triggers internal censorship. Thoughts go unspoken. Desires go unacted. Free will is not erased, it's chilled. And so began the rise of surveillance cues. Tools designed not to capture behavior, but to shape it. Fake cameras, posters with eyes, signage warning of monitoring even when none exists. Facial recognition terminals, active or not, installed to create an atmosphere of scrutiny. Cities install blue lights, audio sensors, and smart poles that may or may not record. But it doesn't matter, because the belief is enough. The result? Crime drops. Dissent softens. Spontaneity fades. The mere presence of an electronic gaze can make people rewrite their own behavior, not out of fear of punishment, but from the internalized pressure to self-regulate. Freedom becomes performative. Surveillance, then, isn't just about watching. It's about programming behavior through fear of visibility. A society that feels constantly observed slowly stops acting like itself, and in that silence, order is maintained, not by force, but by the echo of invisible eyes. Active denial system psychological impact. The active denial system, ADS, isn't designed to kill. It's designed to make you run. Developed by the U.S. military, this non-lethal directed energy weapon emits a high-frequency microwave beam that penetrates the skin just deep enough to trigger an instant, unbearable burning sensation without leaving visible wounds. But what makes ADS so disturbing isn't just the pain, it's the psychological terror it induces in the human mind. When targeted by the ADS, subjects report an overwhelming urge to flee, immediately, instinctively, without question. The sensation bypasses conscious thought. There's no time to analyze, no time to resist. It doesn't feel like heat. It feels like your body is on fire from the inside, and the only thought that remains is escape. This reaction is precisely the point. The ADS turns crowds into chaos, protesters into scattered individuals, combat ants into retreating targets. It creates instant psychological submission, weaponizing our most primal fear, burning alive. But what happens when this weapon is used not just to disperse, but to condition? Tests have shown that repeated exposure trains the brain to associate certain locations, sounds, or even thoughts with pain. It doesn't just move people, it programs them. People begin to avoid protests, rallies, or even speaking out, not because of ideology, but because of trauma linked to invisible suffering. There's no bullet, no blood, no scar, just the memory of pain your body can't explain, and the chilling realization that next time you'll move before the beam ever hits you, because your fear won't wait for your mind to catch up. It already obeys. Fear appeal research in counterterrorism. Fear appeal research in counterterrorism isn't about protection. It's about compliance. Governments and intelligence agencies have long studied how fear can be weaponized, not just to warn, but to shape behavior. Through carefully designed imagery, narratives, and public messaging, they discovered a truth as old as myth. When people are afraid, they obey. This research explores how specific types of fear, especially those tied to violence, death, or mass trauma, can be used to push civilians toward desired actions, accepting surveillance, supporting military intervention, reporting on neighbors, or surrendering rights in the name of security. And the most effective tool isn't force, it's imagery. Photos of blood-streaked subway platforms, footage of masked men with rifles, graphic simulations of biological attacks, sound bites looped through news cycles that say, "It's not a matter of if, but when." These aren't just news, they're psychological levers, refined through behavioral science. Researchers found that fear doesn't need to be constant, only predictable. A recurring dose of anxiety keeps the population in a heightened emotional state. Cognitive defenses weaken, critical thinking shuts down, and into that vulnerability, messages are injected. Trust the state, report suspicious activity, support the new law. It's not just the enemy being targeted, it's you, your emotions, your instincts, your will. Fear becomes a silent architect of obedience. And the most disturbing part? Once fear is normalized, it becomes background noise. You forget how tense you've become, how quiet, how much you've given away. Not because they asked, but because you were afraid not to. Emotion recognition AI in law enforcement. Emotion recognition AI in law enforcement is not just surveillance. It's judgment without words. Built on cutting-edge machine learning and facial analysis, this technology scans human faces for fleeting micro-expressions, tiny, involuntary muscle movements that flash across your face in milliseconds, often before you even realize you're feeling something. Anger, fear, deception, anxiety. The AI sees it all, and it doesn't just watch, it interprets, it decides. Deployed in airports, border checkpoints, police body cams, and interrogation rooms, these systems promise to detect suspicious behavior before it unfolds. By analyzing the twitch of an eye, the tremble in a lip, or the angle of a jaw, AI claims to predict intent. Who is lying? Who might attack? Who's hiding something? But behind the promise of safety lies a darker truth. You are being profiled by your face, not your actions, not your words, your subconscious reactions. This technology doesn't understand context. It doesn't see trauma, culture, or neurodivergence. It sees data points. And if your grief, PTSD, or nervousness mirrors a threat signature, the system flags you. You become suspicious not for what you do, but for what you feel. The psychological impact is profound. People begin to mask themselves. Smiles become survival. Stillness becomes armor. And trust in public spaces dissolves under the constant pressure to appear neutral enough for a machine. Emotion recognition AI doesn't protect you. It reads you, judges you, sorts you, and in doing so, it quietly shifts society into a state of performance, where safety means hiding your truth, because showing it might get you labeled a threat. Stress inoculation training, military use. Stress inoculation training, SIT, is the psychological equivalent of a vaccine, only instead of protecting the body, it prepares the mind to survive the unimaginable. Developed for military personnel and special forces, SIT doesn't eliminate trauma. It preconditions the brain to endure it, to feel the fear, the chaos, the threat of death, and keep functioning anyway. This training is designed to simulate the stress of combat before it happens. Recruits are exposed to escalating waves of pressure, intense noise, sleep deprivation, moral conflict, time distortion, loss of control. They practice breathing through panic, thinking through confusion, making life or death decisions under impossible conditions. But it's not just about resilience, it's about reprogramming reflexes. The brain, once exposed to repeated controlled doses of trauma, begins to adapt. It rewires. It learns how to compartmentalize fear, suppress emotional response, and maintain operational focus while the world burns around you. Soldiers are trained to override their instincts, to move toward gunfire, not away, to hold composure while a comrade bleeds out, to make ethical decisions while detached from their own morality. On the surface, it works. Combat effectiveness improves. Mental shutdown decreases, but the cost hides beneath the silence. Many who undergo SET become emotionally numb, detached from themselves, from others. Their stress is managed, but never truly gone. It simmers, rewired deep into the nervous system. Some can't feel joy anymore. Others can't stop reliving the scenarios they trained for long after the battlefield is behind them. Stress inoculation doesn't just build warriors. It reshapes humans into something colder, more efficient, less fragile. And in the quiet afterward, some begin to wonder what exactly was inoculated and what part of them had to die to make room for it. Hypnotic induction techniques in interrogation. Hypnotic induction in interrogation isn't the swinging watch cliché. It's a silent descent into mental submission where truth becomes malleable and identity begins to unravel. Intelligence agencies have long explored how hypnosis can be used not just to relax the mind, but to open it, manipulate it, and implant ideas so subtly that the subject believes they were always their own. These techniques are often invisible. An interrogator may use rhythmic speech, strategic pacing, focused eye contact, or specific linguistic patterns designed to bypass the conscious mind. Over time, the subject drifts, physically present, but cognitively entranced. This trance state isn't sleep, it's hypersuggestibility, a mental backdoor where reality becomes vulnerable to redirection. Once inside, the interrogator plants cues, emotional triggers, false memories, redirected loyalties. A question is reframed, a belief gently twisted. Under hypnosis, fear feels sharper, shame runs deeper, and compliance feels like relief. The subject may not even realize what's happening. They'll just begin to feel compelled, guided by a voice they trust, unaware of how their own thoughts are being rewritten. What makes this method so insidious is its aftermath. The subject might confess something they never meant to reveal, or believe something they never would have accepted, and later, when questioned, they'll swear it was all voluntary, because to them, it was. This is interrogation without violence, without visible pressure, just a carefully crafted conversation that slips past defenses and reaches the unguarded mind. When used in black sites or psychological warfare, hypnotic induction becomes a weapon that leaves no bruises, only altered truth, implanted trust, and a shattered sense of self. Psychological torture via isolation. Solitary confinement isn't a cell, it's a psychological crucible, one that slowly melts down identity, reason, and emotional stability. Though often framed as administrative or disciplinary, isolation is a deliberate weapon used by intelligence agencies, prison systems, and military black sites to extract obedience, silence dissent, and dismantle the mind without leaving a single visible scar. The human brain is hardwired for connection. Deprived of social interaction, it begins to collapse in on itself. Thought loops, time fragments. The body remains, but the self begins to erode. After days, Prisoners report anxiety, insomnia, and irrational panic. After weeks, hallucinations begin. After months, the mind begins to disassociate from reality. Some talk to shadows, others scream into the silence. Some go completely catatonic. And the horror? That's the design. This isn't passive punishment, it's behavioral conditioning. Intelligence handlers know that a mind broken by loneliness becomes easier to reshape. Prisoners are told the isolation will end if they cooperate, if they confess, if they betray. The isolation itself becomes the interrogator, whispering desperation into every hour. Victims of long-term solitary often describe the same feeling, not pain, but unmaking. They forget how to speak, how to connect, how to trust, and once released, many never fully return. Their personalities remain fractured, their emotional resilience destroyed. This is psychological torture at its most refined. No bruises, no blood, just a slow, surgical extraction of the human spirit. Solitary doesn't just lock the body away, it buries the soul and waits for it to die. Facial expression, surveillance systems, facial expression. Surveillance systems are not science fiction. They are real-time psychological scanners, silently reading your emotions as you walk through airports, stadiums, government buildings, or even city streets. You don't feel it, you don't see it, but the system sees everything. The micro tilt of your mouth, the dilation of your pupils, the tension around your eyes. From these, it doesn't just identify you, it interprets you. These systems use AI-driven facial analysis to assess emotional states: fear, anger, nervousness, joy, disgust, deception. Originally pitched as tools for counter-terrorism and crime prevention, they are now part of a rapidly expanding network of behavioral surveillance. Every glance you give, every twitch of discomfort becomes data, a signal that might flag you as a potential threat or someone worth watching more closely. In airports, this tech is used to single out travelers for additional screening, not based on what's in their bags, but what's on their faces. In public demonstrations, it can identify who's truly enraged versus who's just passing by. In some cities, it's paired with facial recognition to link emotional data to your identity, building a behavioral profile over time. But this goes far beyond security. It's the normalization of emotion monitoring, where your inner life becomes a matter of state interest, where your anxiety in a crowd, your hesitation at a checkpoint, your forced smile in a high security zone could be interpreted as risk, not by a human, by an algorithm. And once your feelings become trackable, they become actionable. You don't have to do anything wrong, you just have to feel the wrong thing, and the system is already watching. Personality-based counterterror. Personality-based counterterror profiling is the quiet science of predictive suspicion, a system built to identify threats not by actions but by who someone is. It begins with a psychological blueprint, the study of patterns, temperaments, values, and behaviors. Then it draws a chilling conclusion: you don't have to do something wrong to be flagged, you just have to seem like someone who might. Governments and intelligence agencies use behavioral science to develop psychological models that link specific personality traits: impulsivity, paranoia, rigid ideology, emotional volatility, to a higher statistical likelihood of engaging in extremist behavior. On the surface, it's a risk assessment tool. Underneath, it becomes a system of pre-crime psychology where inner beliefs, past trauma, or even introversion can mark someone as a potential radical. Advanced systems combine psychometric testing, social media behavior, purchasing patterns, and online interactions to build composite profiles. Algorithms scan for cognitive openings where someone might be vulnerable to radical ideology, loneliness, identity confusion, loss of purpose. If the profile matches a known trajectory, the person may be flagged, watched, or even targeted for intervention. But here's the terror. What if you're wrong? What if a sensitive teenager with political frustration becomes labeled as a terrorist risk? What if a spiritual seeker gets flagged for isolationist tendencies? Once marked, everything you do becomes confirmation of suspicion. The algorithm doesn't forget, and the truth becomes irrelevant. This kind of profiling doesn't wait for action. It assigns potential. And when you criminalize potential, you turn thought into evidence and identity into a sentence written long before you ever act. DARPA Biofeedback Systems. DARPA's biofeedback systems are not designed to make soldiers stronger. They're designed to make them more controllable. These wearable technologies don't just track a soldier's physical state. They monitor, modulate, and even manipulate emotional responses in real time. In the chaos of combat, fear, hesitation, empathy, these are liabilities. DARPA's goal is simple: engineer emotional precision. These systems use biometric sensors embedded in helmets, vests, or even skin patches to constantly monitor heart rate variability, respiration, cortisol levels, brainwave patterns, translating these into emotional metrics. Is the soldier angry, fearful, numb? The device knows before the soldier does, and when it detects something unacceptable, it can respond with calming pulses, electric stimulation, audio cues, or even chemical microdoses to adjust mood on the fly. A heartbeat races under fire, the system slows it down. Anxiety spikes before pulling the trigger, it's suppressed. Empathy flares at the sight of a wounded enemy, it's numbed. At first glance, it seems like optimization, but beneath the surface lies something darker: emotional override. The system doesn't just enhance, it decides. It decides when you should be calm, when you should be alert, when you should disconnect. Over time, the soldier stops interpreting the environment on their own. They start responding like a node in a network, driven not by instinct, but by feedback loops. This isn't just tech-assisted warfare. It's a quiet rewiring of human autonomy. A soldier no longer asks, "How do I feel?" The system answers for them, and in that answer, emotion becomes not a human right, but a military function, monitored, regulated, and, if necessary, erased. Social credit behavior shaping. China. China's social credit system is not just a scoring mechanism, it's a behavioral conditioning machine designed to reshape the psychology of an entire population. Beneath its sleek digital infrastructure lies a system of psychological reward and punishment so refined it doesn't need guards or guns to enforce control. It uses your own desire to belong. The system tracks millions of data points: purchases, location, online comments, friend networks, even how often you visit your parents. From this, a dynamic social score is calculated, determining your access to society. High score, you get priority travel, loans, and dating privileges. Low score, you lose train tickets, job offers, even your children's access to good schools. No trial, no appeal, just algorithmic judgment, updated in real time. What makes it so terrifying isn't the surveillance, it's the internalization. Over time, people begin to self-censor, not because they're forced, but because they fear losing social access. Fear becomes habit, obedience becomes instinct. You don't post that joke, you don't question that policy. You smile, comply, and press like on the right post because you're being watched, and your life depends on staying in the green. The social credit system turns compliance into currency and non-conformity into exile. This is behavioral psychology at national scale, a Pavlovian state where every citizen is both lab rat and experiment. The system doesn't break you, it retrains you, 1 point at a time, until freedom isn't something you lost, it's something you stopped reaching for altogether. Digital footprint, psychological profiling. Digital footprint, psychological profiling is the silent, ever-watching mirror that knows more about you than your closest friend, and sometimes more than you know about yourself. Every click, like, scroll, pause, or share across your digital life becomes a breadcrumb, a clue not just to your behavior, but to your inner state of mind. Intelligence agencies, marketing firms, and behavioral scientists have learned to read these signals like a psychic reads a palm, except this isn't intuition. It's data, cold, precise, and weaponized. Through algorithms trained on massive data sets, systems can infer your personality traits, openness, extroversion, neuroticism, emotional vulnerabilities, political views, insecurities, desires, fears, and even signs of depression, anxiety, loneliness, or radicalization. You don't have to post a diary entry. Your playlists, your browsing history, your online shopping habits, your emoji usage, it all builds a psychological map. These profiles are then sold, stored, or used in ways you may never see. Ads appear that speak to your weaknesses. Articles reinforce your existing beliefs. Suggestions nudge you towards certain actions. Your feed becomes less a reflection of the world and more a projection of how you are most easily influenced. Governments use it to flag threats. Corporations use it to engineer consent. And you scroll, unaware that your very patterns of scrolling are speaking to machines trained to listen for every hesitation, every craving, every silent confession between the lines. This isn't about privacy, it's about prediction, and once your inner world is predictable, it's moldable, because your mind is no longer a mystery, it's a metric, calculated, categorized, and quietly, constantly, controlled.